Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate the support. We appreciate everybody who came through on our live stream. It was an interesting one. It was a long one. Yeah, that's why we're laughing. It was long. We're burnt out. But yeah, man, it was fun. We enjoyed it. We talked about every draft pick that occurred in the NBA draft of 2023. So yeah, a lot went down. If you want to watch that in its entirety, it's a pretty long stream. It's around 4.5, maybe 5 hours. But yeah, so if you want to watch that, it's under the live section under our channel as per usual. But before we get started with today's episode, which is going to be mainly compiled of those clips, so you'll see some of those clips. But if you want to see the full episode in entirety, like I said, it's under our channel. And also, we're gonna be talking about the trades because goodness gracious, there were some big trades, especially involving Washington, and some other squads as well. But yeah, before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the OBT Podcast for updates.
Oh,
And
so
yeah, you could kick off the trade stuff.
yeah. So obviously, leading up to the draft, we had two really big trades.
Mm-hmm.
First we had Kristaps Porzingis to Boston one. Kind of an interesting scenario, right? Where it was initially a three-team deal between the Celtics, the Clippers, and also the Wizards, right? But
Yes.
instead, in the 11th hour, it was supposed to be Porzingis to Boston, Malcolm Brogdon to the Clippers, and then I believe Marcus Morris to Washington, but it fell through because, reportedly, Brogdon's got some physical stuff going on,
Right.
that's not necessarily all that great.
Right.
So in the 11th hour, right, because they had about an hour to do it, for Porzingis's player option
Mm-hmm.
deadline, they ended up pivoting and bringing Memphis into the deal. So it ended up being a three-team deal where it's not Malcolm Brogdon who was moved. Instead, it was Marcus Smart, right, the longest tenured Celtic, obviously former Defensive Player of the Year,
Yes, sir.
going to Memphis, um, with Tyus Jones going to Washington. Or yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Tyus Jones
Uh,
going to Washington.
yeah, exactly. Backup guard from the Grizzlies. Um, Boston, in addition to Porzingis, also gets two first round picks. One of them was the 25th pick from Memphis in this year's draft, and then the
Yes.
other one was top four protected pick from the Warriors in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the Wizards, you got back Tyus Jones, Danilo Gallinari, Mike Muscala, and the 35th pick in the draft.
Yes, sir.
Um, so, with this trade, I feel like the Wizards, kind of recouped a little bit more, than what they got for Beal. Got
Absolutely.
Tyus Jones, right, as a, solid backup point guard, right? Also a relatively tradable contract in the future. Gallinari, Mike Muscala, kind of, expiring contracts, so maybe you can
Mm-hmm.
trade them, maybe not. And the 35th pick, right? So that's another asset that you can use in terms of drafting a young guy. Grizzlies got back Marcus Smart, right? Obviously a KG established veteran. Um, I do like that for Memphis. I think, you get another adult in the room. Um, just because again, there weren't that many for Memphis, and obviously we know that Ja's going to be out for a little while, so he can kind of, be that point guard. As long as Ja's out, and
Yes.
then maybe potentially probably comes off the bench once Ja's back, or maybe he starts, as like a three for like a small ball. But I don't feel like that's going to be the case. But it could
Right.
be against some smaller teams. Um, I guess, in terms of this deal, it's so weird because I feel like I love it for Washington just because again you get back a pick, you get back Tyus Jones,
Mm-hmm.
um, right, and then for Memphis I like it fine. For Boston I like it as well. Because obviously Porzingis is the most talented guy. Obviously
Sure.
you got big injury and health concerns, um, but you do add more size, you do add shooting, and just talent. It just can he be healthy? But then you also lost Smart as a veteran guy. It felt like they were going to trade one of those guards, um, either Smart, White, or Brogdon. I thought Smart was the most likely guy to get moved. I know he
Sure.
has like a lot of equity, as the longest tenured guy and as a big leader in the locker room, but it just felt like you have Derek White, so you probably don't have to have both him and Smart.
Right.
But then with Brogdon, you have the injury history, so if he wasn't going to play, it makes sense to move him. But if the Clippers got word of that, right, then it makes sense that he wouldn't play. Um, so I do kind of like it for all of the teams. I feel like Boston fans are kind of split on it because I know, they don't necessarily want him. They would have preferred somebody else. And they don't like getting rid of Marcus Smart. But
Yeah.
regardless, I felt like Boston was going to shake things up because it was pretty clear, right, that the core probably maxed out. Last year going to the finals against Golden State. and you probably needed to make an upgrade. Um, because this team is a contender now, right? Where there are a team that's going to be competing for the title every year. With Tatum and Brown, as one of the best duos in the league. So it's definitely an upgrade, I guess. It's just I feel like they probably need to do a little bit more, because again, I guess you lightened up your guard rotation, but then you got to figure out what you do with your bigs, right? Do you keep Horford? Like, I feel like you probably need to get a little bit younger with that.
Right.
Um, so again, like I'm fine with it. I guess, in your opinion, what do you think of it? As the Wizards fan.
Yeah, well, as a Wizards guy, I think obviously I said this during our live stream, but I think this is by design. Obviously, Porzingis wanted to get traded. He opted in for a reason. He knew that they weren't gonna want to start a rebuild with him being a centerpiece for sure. So for him to be traded like that, I don't mind it at all. I think our return was more than enough compensation. I think for what transpired with the whole Beal acquisition as well, or the Beal trade as well. So I don't have a problem with it at all. Tyus Jones, I'm really high on him. I think he has capabilities to be a true starting point guard in this league, and I think Washington could be the place for him to prove that. Our guard room is interesting now because you've got Tyus Jones, DeLon Wright, um, Monte Morris. So I feel like Tyus Jones has the best command of the offense. Out of all three of those guys, I feel like DeLon Wright is probably the best defender. So I think Tyus Jones definitely has a spot on our squad for sure. And in a rebuild, that's kind of a guy you want, um, a solid, reliable guy. And he also proved that he's really good in terms of being able to be a backup. So if it comes down to it and he does need to be backup, we've seen it when he had to back up John Morant. There were really no issues there, maybe in the consistency, but in terms of commanding the offense, no issues for me there. I did like the draft compensation that we did receive as well. That definitely helped. We'll get into that a little bit later. Our past selves, we'll talk about that. Um, but yeah, in general, I can't be mad at it because this is what you expect during a rebuild. These are just the steps and precautions that you have to take, and you have to get rid of guys that are swallowing up a huge amount of money for pieces that could be usable in the future, like you said, tradable contracts, or just guys that you may even want to keep around. So I can't be super mad at it. From the other points of view, I like it from Memphis a lot. Um, you get Marcus Smart, you get a guy to kind of replace Dylan Brooks. I guess a more mature Dylan Brooks is what you could call him. A guy who actually backs up his talk with his play. In Marcus Smart, I'm not the biggest Marcus Smart fan. I've thought, well, he shouldn't have the ball in his hands during that time period, but it is what it is. Nonetheless, he's a great defender and whatnot. And then looking at the Celtics' point of view, I think this is a bad deal for them. Um, for me, I think if you're a Celtics fan, I think you don't want to ever lose your identity, lose your heart and soul of your squad, and I think that's what Marcus Smart was to them. And they already lost Udoka, so losing that just hurts. I think tenfold, if you want me to be honest. But
Right.
it is what it is. You did get Porzingis. Porzingis is a great offensive big. He played 65-ish games for us, so that's a career high for him as well. There's been health concerns with him, but I guess if you're Boston, you're kind of winning, but at the same time, you're also losing your heart and soul. But Porzingis is a pretty good defender, so I don't think there'll be any issues with that. At least on the back end, he's a good rim protector, I'll say. But in terms of like guarding smaller people, um, yeah, he's pretty good because he's around 7'3", 7'4", so that does help. Um, but yeah, in terms of the trade overall, I think all three teams definitely were winners, but I definitely don't like it as much from the Boston point of view because now you have
Yeah,
to take on the Porzingis thing. So
that's how I look at it. Like
yeah,
if I were to rank it, I like it the most. For the Wizards because again you
sure,
got something out of Porzingis, then very close Memphis,
right.
um, and then Boston.
Yeah, that's how I would rank it too. So those are my thoughts on it from the Wizards' perspective.
And then moving on, with more Wizard stuff,
Yes, sir.
right? So, I mean, we'll get into the winners and losers of the night, but I definitely feel like they're one of the biggest winners for sure. Then we
Yes.
got another deal with them, where they're actually able to move Chris Paul. Now, we talked about this, before where, twofold, right? In a way where one, um, we thought that it was pretty possible that Chris Paul could be traded because,
Yes.
initially I thought Phoenix would waive him, but then once he got moved, I'm like, okay, well, if he got traded, I'm sure he could get traded again.
Absolutely.
And he did. And this was a trade that, was rumored that the Warriors might be interested in doing. Um, more so from the perspective of adding him in free agency,
Sure.
right? I feel like not necessarily quite as much as a trade, but it was rumored that they could do it, and they definitely did it. So Jordan Poole going to the Wizards, um, for Chris Paul. The Wizards also got back, a future first, that's protected 2030,
Yeah, it's a
as
long
well as
time from
the
now.
second. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a long time from now, as well as a second round pick.
Right.
Um, again, I mean, it's kind of interesting because I feel like with from the Warriors' perspective, I do see some people that say that they really do like it for the Warriors, and I can see in some ways, where you like it, right? You get a more, responsible adult in the room, right? A guy that can handle the ball,
Yeah.
that can run your offense, in big moments, right? Obviously, Steph and Clay and other guys can play off the ball. He can play in the pick and roll, but I don't know. I feel like this is a really big gamble for Golden State because it's just again, Chris Paul obviously is a big name. He's still a really solid player, but he's just not quite what he once was.
Right.
He really still has big major problems staying healthy. Every year it seems like he gets hurt in the playoffs.
Sure.
Um, and again, like also like I feel like defensively he's definitely not the same anymore because he used to be an elite defender,
Yeah.
for his position. And now I feel like he's a guy that kind of gets targeted a lot just because he's so small.
Yeah. And
Um,
he's older. Doesn't
yeah,
help.
and he's older. So I don't know. I mean, I guess for Golden State, I guess your thought process is we probably raised our playoff ceiling because Chris Paul in the playoffs is probably a more reliable guy than
Sure.
Jordan Poole. Even though Jordan Poole did have a good playoff run for them the year they won the title. Um, and at the same time, I guess you get out of Poole's contract, right? We know with the CBA, that definitely punishes you, for having a really expensive roster. And if they had kept Poole, for 4 or 5 seasons, like Mike Dunleavy Jr. said they would, a couple days ago,
Hmm.
ironically,
Yeah.
um,
Welcome to the
uh,
NBA.
yeah, exactly. Then obviously they'd be in that really rough part of the CBA where you lose picks, can't sign certain players, you can't make certain types of trades. Um, so I feel like this one is largely money related. But at the same time, I can see, why, they would kind of talk themselves into it. I just don't like it as much because I don't trust he can stay healthy.
Right.
And I just don't feel like in the playoffs he's going to help them as much. I mean, I could always be wrong because I do think there's value, like I said, with him in the pick and roll game as a
Sure.
passer. But I don't know. I mean, you're really in a weird spot where you gotta hope that you're banking on the playoffs because I feel like regular season you're not going to see Chris Paul play 70 plus games. I don't
Absolutely
think you're gonna
not.
see. Yeah, Steph, he's not a guy that plays as many games now. Neither does Draymond. Clay was relatively healthy last year, right?
Hmm.
Wiggins is normally a healthy guy, right? But
Hmm.
he obviously missed a ton of time last year, though a lot of that was
Personal
personal
reason.
stuff as
Yeah.
opposed to injuries. But he did have some injuries.
Right.
Um, I don't know. I'm kind of lukewarm on it, where I'm like,
Okay.
so I can see it being okay for Golden State. And again, Chris Paul's not a guy that plays poorly in the playoffs. It's just he's always hurt. Now we have seen them be able to work their magic with some guys, right? DiVincenzo was a guy who was, a solid player, but was never healthy, and then he's healthy for the Warriors. Same with Otto Porter Jr., right? Hurt everywhere else, and then he goes to the Warriors and he's able to stay healthy. So
Yeah.
if you can get that out of Chris Paul, then I guess that that's pretty solid. But I don't know. I just think it's a really strange fit. Um, I guess also like you can look at it, from a flexibility standpoint. Maybe you can flip it at the deadline if
Sure.
he doesn't work out. But I don't know. I'm not quite as high on this move, as others. I understand the need to move, the need to where you feel like you have to move Jordan Poole just because he didn't play very well and now he's on a big contract. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like, exchanging youth for, age doesn't always work out. And,
Sure.
of course it could. But I don't know. I just feel like there's still a world where Poole's like a decent player. Um, I mean, maybe he's not as good as what he was in the championship
Hmm.
run, but I also don't feel like he's quite as bad as he was in this year's playoffs. So I feel like there's a relative medium, but I also understand with that big contract, you would like a little bit more flexibility. But either way, I look at it as you probably only have, like I said, 1 to 2 years max, anyways. So you might as well maximize what you can.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how they had that two timelines thing going on, and that's pretty much gone now because Poole's gone, Wiseman's gone. You still have Kaminga and Moody, right? But
Right.
those were the guys that weren't looked at as having quite as high of ceilings. More so Moody than Kaminga in terms of not having that high of a ceiling. But regardless, I like it more for the Wizards personally, just because I think getting back Jordan Poole and other picks, and you even got back Patrick Baldwin, which was revealed during the draft.
Hmm.
I think that that's a pretty solid. That makes up a lot more for what you got in terms of trading Bradley Beal because
Sure.
initially it seemed like you traded Bradley Beal for a bag of chips, and now you're getting
Yeah.
back, you know, more than that in my opinion. So I think if
Obviously, yeah.
you're the Wizards, I think you got to be really pleased, with
Yeah.
what you were able to cobble together, with this new front office. So I think you got to be pretty happy from a Wizards perspective, and I guess from
Hmm.
a Warriors perspective, guess you're okay with it. But again, like I said, it's not the regular season. To me, where you look at it, it's the playoffs. But again, you got to get there, and I'm just concerned that it might be harder for them to get there, just because you have a number of guys that you just can't trust, in terms of staying on the court during the
Health, yeah.
regular season.
Yeah, I agree a little bit. I have a couple of friends that are Warriors fans, and they were kind of giving me an interesting perspective. They thought that Jordan Poole kind of killed their chemistry, killed, kind of was a cancer to the locker room because after apparently there's been rumblings that after he signed that big contract, his head got really big. And I don't think that fit the Warriors culture. So I think the Warriors were
Yeah,
desperate to do anything to get rid of him. So I think that's why you see
yeah,
them taking that call. And I feel like a lot of teams weren't willing to also take on that Jordan Poole contract as well. And lo and behold, the Wizards have so much cap space now with Beal gone, um, Porzingis as well. So, we're able to take on that contract while also getting a young player with potential. So I'm not mad at it at all, but I think that's what was going on with the Warriors thing. I don't necessarily think they really cared what they got back. I think they just wanted to
right,
get rid of Jordan Poole. I think that's
yeah.
what was going on.
That's what I said, and I said,
Yeah,
because I thought he would probably get moved, and that it would probably be selling low.
right.
And I
Obviously.
guess Chris Paul isn't really like selling low
It kind of
necessarily.
is though.
Kind
In
of
his
is,
age. In his
yeah,
age, yeah.
yeah. Because I feel like if Jordan Poole played like how he played in last year's championship run,
It'd be
and you
different.
traded him, you could get back probably more. But at
Right.
the same time, if he played like that, you probably wouldn't be
You
moving him
wouldn't be
anyway.
moving him. And that's
Uh,
the thing. People aren't realizing that that championship run is still a part of his career. So,
right.
and he may have had a stinker season, postseason this year, but nonetheless, that doesn't overwrite what he did for the finals.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I guess Chris Paul, it seems like has kind of worn out his welcome in different, at for different teams as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, I guess because he's a more accomplished veteran, even though he doesn't have a championship, right? He's done more with his career, I suppose, than Poole, just because
Sure.
Poole's so young. But I mean, um, I don't know. Like I said, I understand it. I mean, I just feel like again, I think with Golden State, I mean, I feel like in terms of addressing the issues with the team, I mean, I guess, yeah, you got more shot creation, so that's nice. But again, I guess my issue is I don't really trust him being able to stay healthy because I haven't seen it in
He's
years.
not going to stay healthy. I think everybody knows that too. I think they're
Yeah,
going to
like
do more and more to build around this move, or whatever, But right now, it's not looking good from the Golden State perspective. But I think that was kind of the point.
like I get it. I mean I understand the positive aspects of it, but I don't like it that much. But maybe that's just me. Um,
Yeah,
just in terms of looking at it. But
I'm kind of neutral on it. That's how I'll
yeah,
put it.
yeah, like I said,
I'm not high on it, and I'm not really low on it. I'm just in the middle. I need to
yeah,
see
I
it.
guess that's kind of how you could look at it as well, where it's like I guess both teams definitely, did something, right? But I,
Right.
I feel more high about it with the Wizards than I would Golden State, just
Yeah,
just
I'm
because
riding
again,
high on my horse, man. I feel
yeah,
good.
because it's just again, you're getting more back for Beal
Exactly.
than you would have got. So that's how I look at it. Because again, like you got back a decent player, right? Even
Right.
if he's not the player that he was when they won the title, he's still decent, right? I
Right.
just don't feel like he's as bad as he was in the playoffs because many people will have bad series, right? Clay was awful in the playoffs, but does that necessarily
Michael Porter
define?
Jr.
Yeah, does that necessarily define who he is as a player?
Heck
I
no.
mean, yeah, so I mean, that's how I look at it from that perspective. But either
Exactly.
way, it definitely was, I think, a really crazy start. But the draft was a little bit more muted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in the sense of like, again, we saw guys get picked. Obviously, there were some interesting scenarios in terms of guys rising and falling, but there weren't as many, I think, like crazy events. Obviously, there were some. Um, you know, and again, of course, we'll have the clips, as we're
Yeah.
going through it, right? But Cam Whitmore was definitely one of the biggest surprises, dropping, from what would have been a top 5 pick all the way down to 20. Seems
Mm-hmm.
like there were some concerns about, his um conditioning in terms of his health, and other
Yeah.
things like that. Um, obviously we also saw some other guys rise higher than we expected. Um, so that was kind of cool as well. I guess in terms of winners and losers,
Hmm.
so I guess for me, I'll start off. I think Houston is definitely one of, in terms of teams drafting, like obviously the Spurs, right? They're
Yeah, they won.
the number one pick, the best player. But
Right.
Houston is definitely one I think because I think you got some really solid prospects with Amon Thompson
Yes.
and Cam Whitmore. I
Hmm.
think again you got a really some really athletic guys, um, versatile guys. Again, the question for them is they're a little bit more raw,
Hmm.
especially Thompson.
Hmm.
So the question is, can they actually can they develop the other skills, the other aspects of their game? But if they
Sure.
do, then I think that's really, really, really solid for them because again, you pretty much filled positions of need as well, combined with the talent. And that's kind of like the best aspect, the best that you could ask for, right? Because again, they needed a guard, point guard, and they needed some wings. And they got
Right.
both those guys, and those were two of the, best players at those positions in the draft, right? Scoot obviously is your best point guard, and Brandon Miller's your best wing, right? But Whitmore was still looked at as a pretty solid prospect.
Right.
And Amon Thompson, right? He was looked at as one of the better point guards, right? So I mean, I think you got to have them towards the top of the list for sure.
Yeah, I agree. My winner would probably be Detroit.
I
Mainly
think
due to the fact that they picked up the other Thompson twin, Osor, the one with arguably the more potential, and the higher ceiling. Great player. I think he's going to be really good if he can figure out that shot. It's over with for the league. In terms of Detroit, I think they're going to be a really solid team because they're just building more and more around their Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, their bigs. They have a really good squad. I think looking into the future, obviously. I don't think they're going to be horrible this year, but they're still going to be, pretty
they should
low.
definitely be better than what they were last
Yeah,
year. Although in fairness, that's not saying much because they were the worst team in the league
right.
last
But you're going to see an improvement, I think, for
year.
sure,
They
especially
can
if
have
certain guys stay healthy. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Um, and then I guess another winner for me, it's kind of rough. You said Houston. I think they're definitely one of the biggest ones as well. Um, Let me think. I would probably have to go with OKC. They had some big pickups, I think. And they had a lot of picks as well. So you can't really be mad at the haul that they pulled as well. And just more stuff to build around, their already young and solid core. Obviously you got Josh Giddey, SGA, Chet Holmgren's coming back, so you've got a lot to look forward to, and they're going to keep building in future years. So I feel like they're probably going to be, a winner for every draft, coming up until, they run out of picks pretty much. So that's kind of my take on the draft. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good draft.
Yeah.
Like you said, a little bit more quiet, but I think that's kind of good sometimes. But in terms of the order, that a whole Asor Thompson pick definitely shook up the entire board. I think that put teams on their toes, and you saw moves that I don't think were necessarily in play beforehand. I think other teams probably had Asor Thompson on their radar, and then they kind of had to go into Plan B mode, which led to I think some trades and whatnot. So, and that's the beauty of the draft. Guys stocks rise and guys stocks fall. So then sometimes,
Yeah.
you're lucky to get a guy whose stock may have fallen and then he turns out to be really good in the league and everybody passed on him and slept on him. But then, you also have a guy where you pick him up because his stock rose and then it's pretty much a steal, and you also got something else later on in the draft, depending on how you look at it. So there were
Yeah.
some other
I think,
surprises too.
yeah. Another team that I think did pretty well, Portland.
Yeah,
Got Scoot Henderson, right?
obviously.
That
Yeah.
was the guy after Victor, right? That was kind of looked at to be the next best guy.
Sure.
You also got Chris Murray, right, as a wing. So and then also, we mentioned the second round picks later, but we're for this part of the podcast, we're primarily referring to the first round.
Right.
But I just think, yeah, Portland, I think, did a really good job there. Obviously, for them, they have some questions, in regards to Damian Lillard, right? Because it sounds like there's a possibility that if they don't do much in the offseason that he could be gone, which again wouldn't shock me at all because I don't really think Portland's going to do a whole lot, right? Because it was reported that they weren't going to trade the pick.
Right.
Uh, Teams clearly were interested because it was kind of interesting, right? Because if Scoot was taken second by Charlotte, I feel like there would have been like very little interest in trading for pick number three.
None,
But
I
with
think.
Scoot going, yeah, exactly. But with Scoot going third, right, then you heard a lot of interest with teams trading up, but Portland didn't do it. So, you know, I mean, I guess if I'm Portland, right? Like I said, I think this is the right move. I think they should keep the pick, and I
Yes,
think they should move. And I think they should end the relationship with Damian Lillard, not in a negative way, but
on
like
a high note.
terms, yeah, just rebuilding. Trading him to a contender that he wants to go to. Because
Yes,
again, like you're not really going anywhere. I think so. You might as well, rebuild. You have a lot of interesting young players, right? Um, in addition to Scoot, right? Simons, as I mentioned, Chris Murray, Shaden Sharp, right? So they have a number of like really intriguing young guys. So I feel like they should continue to build with that, as opposed to like just trading it, to help them out for the short term. Because I just feel like
right,
you're not going anywhere. Like
right.
I don't see a world where Portland wins the title next year, unless they get like one of the top 5 players or something, which is not going to happen.
Right. I agree. Moving on from Dame is definitely the thing to do in this situation. Scoot, this happens. It's like a generational cycle. It's a cycle of the NBA life. You move on from your legend to pick up, another generational talent. That's how it goes. Unfortunately, the Dame Lillard saga wasn't the prettiest. They had some good years, but at the same time, they had some really bad years and they wasted it. And they're going to continue to waste it if he's still on the squad. Dame has already expressed he doesn't want to be around a team that's pretty much rebuilding. And I think that's the right move for his career. He needs to be on a contender, get himself back in the groove of NBA playoff basketball because, Dame time, we're really high on Dame. That's why we're talking like this. Um, so, and the playoffs are better with Damon, I believe. So, he's one of the top NBA guards in the league. So to have him not be in the playoffs, I think is a crime. Um, so hopefully they can get a deal done where he's on a contender and they move forward with a solid rebound rebuild with Scoot Henderson at the helm, and I think that's really good. I know Scoot said, "Yeah, if we combine our games, we're gonna be unstoppable or whatever. It's over or whatever." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen, but I think Dame's gonna be out of there soon." Um, but I feel like if we were looking at a situation where they trade the number 3 pick and they get some real elite help around the league, from a certified bucket, um, then we would be talking differently. Maybe we'd be talking about Portland can contend now, but that didn't happen. So, we're looking at the Scoot Henderson Portland Trailblazers, and that's solid because you look at what they have. They do have some solid pieces, but not solid enough to contend, but solid enough to start a rebuild that will lead them into a brighter future. So you love to see it in terms of what Portland is going to do in terms of their future, but the present day now, they need to really be focused on moving Dame to a solid team and a
Right.
contender so he can win something or at least attempt to.
Yeah, obviously, another team obviously I mentioned as a big winner, before we even talked about the draft, the Wizards, because I think they got a great haul in terms of getting some young players, getting future picks, getting back assets, for the guys they moved. Obviously we don't have to spend as much time on that because we already did, but
Right.
that's another team.
Sure.
Another team that I think, kind of sneakily did a decent job tonight, I think, is Dallas. Um, Now it was kind of widely expected for them to trade the pick. I thought
Absolutely.
they were going to. And I thought other teams were going to, trade picks as well, right? But that didn't really happen. They ended up, well, they did trade the 10th pick, I guess. So just cut
Technically
this part
speaking.
out.
I mean, no, we'll keep it. I mean, technically speaking, you're right.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, they traded the 10th pick. But we expected them to trade the 10th pick, for more of a veteran guy.
Sure.
Um, but I guess they traded down, so they traded the 10th pick. And it got back. I think it was 12, right?
Yes.
Um, exactly. So I think it was Davis Bertans and the 10th pick, for pick 12, and they
Yes.
used it for, and they got Derek Lively.
Which is a great pickup.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Which I think is a really solid pickup for them, defensive big, right? Which is again is the type of player that they need. Right. Given a lot of their struggles last year in terms of finding solid big man lineups. Because Christian Wood not really great defensively as a center.
Yeah.
Um, JaVale McGee, right? Probably closer to being done.
He's on his
Again,
way out.
yeah,
That's how
exactly.
it goes.
Yeah, love JaVale McGee, right? But at this
Yeah.
point in his career, yeah,
Hey,
probably
he's a
not going to
champ.
be too much. Yeah, exactly. Um, then after that, right? Then they also then they used that exception that they got from that Bertans trade to bring in Rashawn Holmes, who was a guy has basically been kind of out of commission with Sacramento. He fell out of the
Yeah.
rotation. Used to be their starting center a few years ago, right when they were not out of team. Right then they pick up Sabonis, and he's basically out of the rotation. Right, you see guys like Alex Len and Chimezi Metu, right, playing more big minutes.
Yes.
Um, so I guess again for Holmes, this is kind of a new start for him.
Yeah.
So he's kind of got a chance to kind of reestablish himself, right? My guess is because he's the veteran guy, maybe he probably starts over Lively. Um, they're definitely, I don't think, bringing back Christian Wood. But again, if you're not bringing back Christian Wood, right, it's nice to replace him with two other bigs, that
Absolutely.
probably give you, yeah, that probably give you more value, defensively. Even though again they don't space the floor. Um, but again, you don't have to have that, because they have other guys that can hit shots.
Right.
After this, right, after that, it's kind of all about for them, can they get some guys in free agency? So that'll be interesting.
Right.
I think they're not really going to have cap space, right? But I think will have a better chance at having that exception, so they could probably use that to bring in somebody.
I think they'll
Um,
land
again,
somebody who wants to play with Luca, you know?
again, Rashawn Holmes wasn't the guy I was expecting them to bring in,
Right.
but I think again it's fine, to take a gamble on a guy that's a veteran that wasn't playing at all, and again you gave up nothing.
It helps.
Right? Yeah, 'cause you still got a good draft pick, and you got a guy that that fills a position of need.
Exactly.
Um,
It's a
so
win-win.
I think yeah, exactly. So I think they sneakily did a decent job.
Sure, they crept in
Um,
there.
yeah, I think in my opinion, yeah, exactly. Just because again, when you look at the position they were in, and what they ended up doing, I think that's pretty solid in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And I think they also brought in Olivier Maxence Prosper.
Yes.
Um,
It's a good fit for them.
from yeah, exactly. So again, you got not one but two young guys. And you got back a veteran, right? So, that's I think that again, considering they ended up, nobody ended up really trading for any veterans, I think that's fine, because that seemed like the theme of this draft where there were a lot of teams, especially the high spending teams that just looked to build through the draft, right? We
Mhm.
saw Denver. I think they made some pretty solid picks. Um, in terms of the guys that they brought in, right? Because it seems like they're probably going to lose Bruce Brown
Right.
Jr., right? So it makes sense,
Yeah.
to kind of replace them with other guys that are kind of similar,
Mhm.
just younger on more cost controlled contracts. We saw the Lakers, right? Similar thing. They brought in two guys in the draft, right? Jalen Hood Scafino, and Maxwell Lewis, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, two guard forward type guys. Again, young guys we saw with the Warriors, right? Drafted Brandon Podiemski, um, with their 19th pick. And then
Yes.
we also saw them, with that Beal trade, right? They brought in Trace Jackson, which is a guy that we like. Um, and they selected him with the 57th pick. So, I think, we saw a number of veteran contending teams make interesting types of moves where it definitely felt like, saving costs, by kind of picking up guys to the draft. With Miami, we saw them pick Jaime Jaquez Jr.
Yeah.
And that guy, that could potentially, play some minutes for them, um, next season. So we saw that a lot. And I think that's, kind of what we saw, in terms of the theme. So I feel like a winner in general is just kind of younger ish players because, these guys are going to potentially get a shot to play. Um, and just in general, right? For those teams, it allows them, to keep the costs a little bit lower. Um, but it is interesting because, like I said, I expected there to be more trades in terms of veterans being moved, but we didn't see it. Obviously, there's definitely a chance for that to happen
Yeah.
as we get close to free agency, right? Because this is just the draft. But for now, like you said, it was definitely like you and I both said, it was definitely a more muted draft.
Right.
Uh, than I think we were expecting. I think we
Still
were expecting a
enjoyable
little.
though.
Yeah, yeah, it was definitely enjoyable. I think we were expecting a little bit more activity in terms of veterans getting moved because
Yeah.
obviously there's always picks that are getting moved around every
Right.
year in the draft. But,
That's the
I think
norm.
we expect, yeah, I think we expected some more veterans. But again, that could still be on the way. And either way, we still had two huge trades before the draft, regardless, because
Absolutely.
those are definitely blockbuster big trades. Um, anyways,
Yep.
so yeah. So I guess if we want to like mention like specific guys that are steals,
Mhm.
um before like we have the clip, the highlights of our live
Yeah.
stream, like you mentioned, Asor Thompson, I think that's a steal.
Yeah, it's the biggest
For
one.
sure. Yeah, Cason Wallace, I think that's great for Oklahoma City, a
Yeah.
steal. um Grady Dick, I think for
Grady,
Toronto, I
yes.
think that's also a really awesome one.
Jordan
um
Hawkins.
yeah, Jordan Hawkins, I think, for sure. Exactly. I think going to New Orleans, I think that's an awesome one.
Yeah.
Um, So I think those were kind of mine, that I looked at,
Okay.
as steals. I mean, I guess yours were relatively similar as
Yeah,
well.
mine were pretty
We talked
similar.
about it. Yeah,
Um, I guess let me look through one more time. Yeah, the biggest one for me, obviously Thompson. I saw where that is. Um, I'm gonna be honest. I'm still really conflicted about the Wizards pick. In Bilal Coulibaly, but I feel like there's
yeah,
potential there. I feel like I said, he's a project. In the live stream, you'll hear my thoughts. It was kind of funny. I went to the bathroom and then, or I went to get water and came back, and then there was a trade that happened, and I was like, okay, well that's just fantastic. Uh, yeah, but I mean, I think our steals are pretty similar. I guess to get into guys that we didn't necessarily
yeah,
understand. I think the
yeah,
biggest question for both of us was definitely the Orlando pick of Jet Howard. We would have
yeah,
preferred, Grady Dick to go there, but nonetheless, you're
yeah,
still getting a shooter. That's what they wanted. And
yeah.
I'm sure they have
I
their
guess,
reasons for it, but I think this was a head scratcher. And I'm looking around, a lot of teams or a lot of sites graded this one a C plus around that range. So I think
yeah,
it's not horrible. It's not in the D territory, but it's definitely in the C where it's kind of a head scratcher. But at the same
yeah,
time, he has a lot of size but he's a defensive liability. But hey, I'm not gonna question it. There's questions about everything about his game, but his shooting. Said that like 10
yeah.
times tonight.
I guess another winner, I guess you could argue Indiana, just
Yes.
by on account of having so many picks, but also picking, I think, a number of really, solid players. I mean, obviously, Jarius Walker, Ben Shepherd. I mean,
Hmm.
the other guys you mentioned as well, for Indiana that they picked. I mean, just in general, I mean, I think that they like, did a really good job because it just felt like every pick that they made, I thought, was pretty solid in my
Sure.
opinion. I mean, those two picks I liked, just because again, Walker, that was a guy that I had relatively high, and I felt like that they needed a forward, because they're just so small, and then
Right.
Shepard just having a guy out there that's a shooter. I like I said, I liked what Indiana did a lot in
Yeah.
my opinion.
Me too.
So losers, I guess. I don't really want to say Charlotte is a loser because I still feel like Miller is good.
No, they're not a loser.
Yeah, but I do think that they should have gotten Scoot. Um, I don't know because I feel like in this draft it's kind of hard to like just flat out say like a team was a flat out like just loser.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean as somebody who knows even more about the picks than I do,
Hmm.
I guess from your perspective when you look at all the teams, how did you feel in terms of like who do you think probably, even if you don't necessarily consider them a quote unquote loser, how about like who you thought probably came out not great coming out of the draft, in terms of
Uh,
these teams.
that's a good question. I would probably have to go with maybe Atlanta. Um, I thought they had
Okay.
some funky picks. I kind of understand Kobe
Buffkin.
Buffkin. I do understand it, but that was more of a best available kind of thing. I'm not sure how it's going to work fit wise. I know they want to bolster up their roster around Trey Young and whatnot. I think that's what Quinn Snyder and their management is thinking. Um, but at the end of the day, if you look, even further down with who else they picked? They picked another two guard, so they picked two shooting guards basically, or 2 point guards, two combo guards, whatever. Seth Lundy's not a bad player, but it's kind of a head scratcher where it's like, okay, he's a standout at the combine, but at the same time, I mean, he did have like a pretty good year at Penn State as well, but I don't know. It's just a weird fit, considering that you do already have DeJounte Murray, um, Trey Young, and you just drafted Buffkin, then you pick another guard. I don't know. I don't understand the logic there. Maybe they know something that I don't. But yeah, I would have to grade that pretty poorly. Um, I don't know. I feel like they could have done better in my opinion.
What
But
did
yeah,
you think
I
of?
what's up?
Oh no, go on. Just finish your
I was
statement.
just gonna say I don't necessarily think that the Hornets lost at all. I think they got a good
Okay.
player in Brandon Miller.
Yeah.
Like you said, you would prefer Scoot to go there. I think Scoot is the better
Yeah.
player. But at
I
the
feel
end of
like
the
a
day,
lot of people are going to say that Charlotte was a loser.
okay,
But like you said, I think we're both in the mindset that Miller's not bad. Like he should be
exactly.
a really good player. Scoot's better, but I don't necessarily look at it as like, you know, this is the worst thing in the world that could have ever happened.
Right.
I mean, could be wrong. But like, because I still think Miller's going to be good. Is he probably going to long term be Scoot? Probably not. But I
No.
still think he's going to be a really solid player. Regardless, like I just don't look at it as a complete loss the way others might, because this has definitely been like a very polarizing topic in terms of
Sure.
like who should go, um, second to Charlotte. Like I said, I had Scoot, but like I said, I wasn't going to be, in rage mode. If Charlotte took Brandon Miller, because I still think he'll be good.
Yeah. And then
Um,
Charlotte also they drafted Nick Smith Jr., so that was also a really good
yeah,
pickup. I think that's also another steal, for sure, because he had some injury issues, but at the same time, he's 6'5", 185, so he's pretty good. He can create space, and I think for a rebuilding team like Charlotte, I guess you can call them a
and they also
rebuilding
picked
team.
Demar Bailey, I think.
Yeah. So they did pick up some guys that are pretty good. Um, so you
And
can't really complain. I think they were definitely winners.
yeah, and I think James Najee as well.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so they had some picks. I mean, I don't know. They were kind of interesting. I guess. What did you think of Utah's? Utah's was kind of, I
I
don't know.
liked
I feel like
Utah's.
Utah. Yeah, I like Utah's too, right? They took Taylor Hendricks, Keontae George, and I think Sensabaugh. So I
Yes.
feel like I like most
They
of their
picked up
picks.
good wings and a good guard,
Yeah,
good scoring guard.
yeah, yeah. That's what I'm thinking because I feel like some people maybe like feel kind of weird about Utah's picks because I feel like some of those guys may not be quite as well known.
Sure.
Um, but I feel like I liked pretty much all of their picks that they grabbed. I mean,
They
George,
got guys that go
obviously,
under the radar.
yeah, George is a little bit different because he's older.
Hmm.
Um, Now some people think that in Utah think he can be a point guard. I don't feel like he's a point guard. Um,
Mm.
I
It
feel
would
like
be
he's
a
more of a
project if he's a point guard. If he's a two guard and
yeah.
he's
I
just
feel like
focused on scoring, he's fine.
yeah. But either way, like I feel like I liked what they did. I mean, do I feel like they should be like quote unquote winners? I don't
I
necessarily
think
know if
so.
I would call them. Yeah. I don't know if I would say they're like absolute winners, but I think they did a good job. Like I think I would put them much closer to winners. They're definitely not losers at all.
I think
So
they
I feel
added
like
pieces that are like strong,
mhm.
um, buildable guys where it's like they're not going to be that great in their first year, but I guarantee you, second, third year, you're going to see the potential that they have, especially as young guys.
Right.
I feel like if you watched a
Milwaukee,
lot of high school and college basketball, you definitely could buy in on what they're trying to sell.
right. Yeah, Milwaukee was also kind of another weird one where like, they
Yeah.
bought their way into the or not bought, they made a trade to get into the I think late first round or second round or whatever it was, and
Hmm.
I don't know, their pick was kind of bizarre. I mean, in fairness, I didn't know as much about him as you did, but it sounded like you
Oh,
were not that high on
oh, I
this
know
pick,
exactly who you're talking about. Um,
right?
Hang on, what's his name? You're talking about Andre
I think it was
Jackson Jr.
Andre
Yeah.
Jackson, yeah.
So just to give you guys some context on him, he was a part of that huge UConn run, but he averaged like 6.6 rebounds and like 4 assists on 28% from the three. So, he's one of those guys that's going to give you the hustle, the grit, all that stuff. But in terms of the numbers and the stats, it's going to look bad. I'm sorry. And I don't see him getting a lot of PT. Maybe they picked him because he's a project. And they like what they saw from him in terms of like speed, because he can get the rebound and then like just zoom up the court and maybe get like a fast transition bucket because he is pretty fast. But
Yeah.
I just don't really understand, trading your way into the second round for that. I don't know. That seemed like a iffy mistake, but people are grading it high, so maybe I'm just talking out of the side of my mouth here. But from what I saw in college, I wasn't a huge fan. Um, but goodness,
Um,
I don't know.
interesting quote. Interesting quote coming out from Detroit Pistons GM Troy Weaver when asked about concerns about um Asar Thompson coming from Overtime Elite. I think Halle Berry's pretty in church and the grocery store.
That
I
can't be real.
it is real.
Okay. Well,
Um,
that's bad because I think that's a great fit. And I already expressed, overtime elite is skeptical. There's skepticism around it, but at the same time, I think their talent is there for sure. So, but in terms
um,
of that quote, I'm confused. I honestly thought you were joking for a second.
yeah, no, I'm not joking.
Yeah,
I
that's
I
crazy.
don't even I couldn't make a quote like that up if I tried. But
True.
I don't know. I think in terms of a couple of players that are winners, I guess, just to kind of, wrap it up. I definitely feel like Grady Dick is one. And Toronto, I guess, as a team, I think is a winner because I think that's a good pick.
Yeah.
And he gets to go to, an interesting team,
Sure.
that has some other talent. It's not like some of the other teams. Jaquez, I think that's a guy that should be pretty excited about where he's going. He's going
Hmm.
to Miami.
Yeah.
I'm sure he'll love it there. And just
Yeah.
in addition, right, you got another, a bunch of other hardworking guys. I think it's a really good fit for him. Um, so I like that a lot. Um, so and again, like the Thompson twins, I think where they went, I think they should be pretty thrilled with where they went.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, exactly. So like I said, overall, I feel pretty good about most of these picks. In terms of who was picked. Obviously, like you said, there's a couple of weird ones, right? Like Jet Howard going as high as he did. But I feel like you said, even with Orlando, it's not like it was a terrible pick. It's just it probably wouldn't have been the guy that you would have picked.
Right.
Um, but at the same time, having both 6 and 11 makes it not as bad, right? Like Anthony Black, you got at 6. That's a guy that everybody has liked, that has risen a lot from where he initially was ranked, and he should help them out big time,
Absolutely.
right? Because he's a scrappy defensive guy. Um, and again, he's another guard that Orlando can add. I'm just kind of curious what they do with their guards, just because they have so many.
Hmm.
Um, they have an interesting lot, right? They got like 4 or 5 guards there. So I feel like one of those guys is going to be moved.
Probably Cole
Um,
Anthony.
maybe I'm wrong, but maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Um, overall. I guess in terms of, do you have any guys right where they may not be that thrilled with where they're going? Because even like
Let's
with
look around.
Whitmore falling, like going to Houston, I think is still good.
Yeah, it's
Um,
good.
but
It's a
but at the
better
same
spot than
time,
last year.
yeah. So I guess for you, what are you thinking in terms of like guys that may not be all that thrilled about where they're going?
Hmm. That's a good question. Um, I think maybe a couple of the Indiana guys probably aren't too happy about that, and that's not even like
Where
a knock on, and it's not even a knock on Indiana's team. I think it's more so the
right?
place. I don't think Indiana's that much of a desirable place, but
Yeah,
also
it's a
their
big
roster.
basketball.
I know it is a big basketball town, but at the same time, I don't know. I feel like some of these other guys, their dreams would have been to play in like, LA or something like that. You know how it goes. Everyone,
Yeah,
I feel like Indiana's still a small market team. I feel like some of the
it
guys who
is.
went to these small market teams are kind of like, "Oh, boo, you stink," that kind of thing. Um,
Right.
Let me think. I think probably I don't know. I feel like everybody should be fairly happy. I think most of these teams pick fairly well. Um Yeah, that's how I'm gonna go with it. Maybe um hmm maybe I don't know, man. I I feel like it has to be just the guys that got drafted to Indiana. That those are the only ones I can really think of. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe maybe Amon Thompson might be a little concerned. I don't know because
Really.
Like you said, Houston is a rough spot to be in, but it's most certainly better than what it was last year. Um, I feel
Yeah,
like
you got
if
you
you
built up.
exactly, you have improvements to what was last year. But at
Yeah,
the same
but
time,
it could get a little wonky.
exactly. I feel like it's still going to be a little bit wild. So, nonetheless, I think probably Amon Thompson isn't completely thrilled. I'm sure he's thrilled he went number 4. It's a relief. But in terms of
Yeah.
going to Houston in that situation, that may be a little bit rough because that's I feel like one of the biggest projects in the NBA as a team.
Right.
We've
Yeah.
expressed they're like the AAU of hoops right now. So, um, yeah, Indy
And
and
then,
Amon Thompson.
yeah, and then obviously, we also have a bunch of guys, that didn't get drafted, right? That'll be on two-way contracts, right? And that was kind of coming out, right after the draft occurred.
Yeah,
Um, so obviously, and if even if you didn't get drafted, right? Like we'll see these guys, we'll still see some of these guys around.
sure.
Um, I guess another winner that I forgot to add, I feel like Trace Jackson, he's probably pretty happy going to Golden State.
Yeah,
Just because again, to play with some talented guys.
yeah.
Um,
Shout out Trace
you know,
Jackson, man.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so one of our guys.
Yeah,
So, um, but overall, yeah, I mean, I thought this was a really good draft. I mean, I guess the TV coverage I thought was kind of
it
a
was
little bit
terrible.
concerning. Just yeah, because I feel like there was a lot of issues in terms of they made it a little bit too confusing. We got confused at one point because we were kind of confused as to who had what pick. Because whenever there was a trade, we were looking at it, at a lot of the updates on Twitter. But if you were looking at it on TV, they didn't a lot of the picks, even after they were traded, still had the original team there, right? So
Yeah.
then, and again, part of that's also like an NBA thing, right? Where
Right.
like the guy goes up and puts his hat on for the other team, even though we know he's not playing for that team.
Right.
So I always thought was kind of just dumb, um, in my opinion. But I don't know. At the same time, we didn't really hear a lot of the draft coverage just because we were talking so much.
Hmm.
And obviously if you play it too loud, right, then you can have the issue of the copyright stuff going on. Apparently just got a thing about Kawhi getting a cleanup procedure on his knee with the meniscus thing, so 8 weeks. But I don't know. Like that definitely was kind of interesting to see. With the TV broadcast, because again, I watch it every year, but this is the first time where I didn't. I mean, we had it on, but at the same time, I wasn't really listening to it because
I
we were
had it
streaming.
muted. I had it
Yeah,
completely muted.
yeah. So
But when I
kind of
glanced over and they were doing stuff, it looked kind of wonky and it kind of took me out
yeah.
of it. And I just resorted to Twitter to my updates, honestly.
Right. Kind of interesting how Woj initially, claimed that he was going to back off of announcing picks, but then eventually he went to announcing picks anyways. Um,
Yeah.
some of it was kind of interesting where he would kind of like try to announce the picks without really saying it
Right.
outright. And then later, as it got to like closer to the second draft, he was just, doing his thing.
Yeah.
Um,
He was
Boston,
letting
I
them
feel like
fly.
it's another interesting team in terms of the draft where like, they did a ton of trading back. In the draft, right, where they would have a pick and then they would trade back and get more picks.
Right.
Um, so I feel like that gives them some flexibility, right? They got what was it, Jordan Walsh, I think, in the draft.
Yes.
Um, so I feel like that's an interesting pick. Again, I don't know how much some of these guys will play, for those type of teams, but regardless, overall, I was relatively pleased with most of the picks, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess any kind of final thoughts, before we kind of go to the next, segment where, it's kind of more so highlights from, us covering the draft.
Yeah. Good draft overall. I thought it was fairly well paced. It was long, but I felt like the pacing was still good. Teams definitely took their time on some of the picks, which I think is the right thing to do when you're drafting certain players. Outside of the top three guys, everything was kind of in the air, especially after the second Thompson twin was taken.
Yeah.
That definitely shook things up, and that's when I kind of got hyped. What'd you
Right.
say?
This is definitely the first time where like I was kind of stumped in terms of like who was going where.
Exactly. Like my entire mock was kind of messed up. There were some ones that I got correct, like Anthony
Yeah.
Black, but other than that, it was kind of cool waiting in anticipation to see where some of these guys are going because there's a lot of good guys that are like plug and play. I feel like this is one of the more stat classes in terms of plug and play guys, not necessarily franchise changers, but guys who are going to have a immediate impact coming into the league. So it's going
Yeah.
to be fun. There's a lot of freak athletes in this one, so watch out for it because guys for some reason are getting bigger and stronger earlier. So now we're seeing these growth spurts even
Yeah.
earlier in age. So
Right. Cause
what's
yeah.
up,
Cause like see Jarvis Walker, right? Jarvis Walker at 6'7", 250, and he's
baby Zion?
yeah, again, and he's a relatively young guy. It's like, wow.
He's room to
Um,
grow. Um, so it should
exactly.
be cool, like to see all these young guys flourish later on in their careers.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I enjoyed it thoroughly, but yeah, it was
And I
really cool.
and I think with the CBA in general, it kind of is kind of nice that it's a draft where you have a lot of plug and play guys, around the same time that the CBA is
Right,
changing. Again,
it's a big
that
deal.
means that like you have some good options to pick, um, long term. So I think that's kind of so the timing kind of ended up working out in a way
Absolutely.
that we may not have necessarily expected before because because again we still don't know everything about the new CBA, but it's very clear that I think that influenced a lot of what we saw. This last week, right? I think that was
Yes,
a big influence for why the Warriors made the trade they did. In addition to probably feeling like he got a locker room upgrade. But I also think it also had to do with some, money aspects as well.
absolutely.
Um, but yeah, so I guess, this kind of concludes, like, I guess in a way, like part one, of our
Hmm.
podcast, so the second part, which is, still in this video, is gonna, just kind of be like, us kind of like, covering a lot of the picks in the draft. Mainly, I think the first round, because again, like,
Yeah,
if we had both, I think it would be, very, very long.
it'll be
Um,
highlights. Our best reactions of the first round, the most notable picks, the biggest surprises, things like that. So I think that's a
exactly.
good way to
Yeah,
describe it.
so Right, exactly. So if you kind of want to see more, of what we thought of a lot of the individual picks, so stick around for that. Um, but outside of that, obviously, like I said, I guess we'll see you next week.
Yeah. All right, pass selves, take it away.
So
That's kind of how it's gonna go, I think. Um, while the pick is in, we can just continue to talk about the guy. I guess that's who we think is gonna go. Um, and we pretty
so
much,
yeah, so I
yeah,
guess
we
in
have
terms of
Wemby. Yeah. What'd you say now?
yeah. Oh no, so I guess so it looks like Adam Silver's about to come up to the podium
Yep.
with the
Yep.
first pick.
Wemby, there
Yep,
he is. So Wemby's going,
exactly.
man. This is good.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what
Yeah,
you
I
want
think
if you're
you're
San Antonio.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're just a few seconds, well, not just a few, like maybe like 10, 15 seconds ahead. But
Okay.
regardless, like yeah, but regardless, yeah. I mean, this one was pretty much a no-brainer. Like you said,
Yeah.
the best prospect in the draft.
Yeah.
Has the potential to be an all-time great generational player.
Yes.
Obviously, many people he will be an all-time great generational player. Um, so if you're the Spurs, right, obviously, this is pretty much a dream scenario, right, where you get the guy, that everybody's wanted, for quite a while now, right, because everybody's heard his name, for basically like, well over a year at this point.
Exactly.
Right, 7'4", right, super skilled. He has, I mean, there's a potential chance for the Spurs to be, obviously not like a great team, but like say next season, there's a chance for them to be at least
Decent.
a semi decent team.
Yeah.
Kind of right away. Like maybe they're like, right around that play-in range. Something like that, as opposed to like the worst team in the league. Obviously a lot of other factors, fall into that as well, but obviously this was the only way that this could have gone, right? In terms of him going number one, there was no way anything else was going to happen. Um, this was the obvious one, right? Really, where the draft really starts is at the second pick, because
Sure.
again, we still don't know who's going number two. The Vegas odds have kind of shifted back and forth, so a lot of people believe that it will be Scoot, whereas it seemed like it was Miller. So maybe Charlotte's kind of just throwing people off, but obviously there's a lot of things that could change, right, depending on what happens, right? If Charlotte picks Scoot, right, what does Portland do with the third pick? Do they take Miller?
Right.
It seems like he would probably fit there better, but then what happens with Lillard, right? If you trade Lillard, you'd like to start with Scoot as his replacement as opposed to Miller, but again, that's kind of the thing that's always great about the NBA draft, is that there's always, a lot of surprises in terms of, things that go on, right? I mean, we had surprises before the draft, right? That kind of tie into it. So, we know that there's going to continue to be a lot of things going on, as well. So, I mean, that's why the draft is always a really fun time.
Yes, it is.
Um, for the, just because in general, right? Like just seeing who goes where. There's always, players that, you think will get drafted higher, right? But then they end up dropping. It sounds like some people believe that Cam Whitmore will drop.
Yeah, and I had him pretty
Kind of,
high.
yeah, exactly, yeah, because there were some people that had him, maybe like a top five-ish pick,
I
right?
had
And
him
now a
top
lot of,
5.
yeah, exactly, and whereas a lot of others believe he'll drop. Like I had him at 6.
Mhm.
Um, so obviously we'll have to see, what happens as we keep going.
I feel like the
Um,
Thompson twins stock has kind of risen too, oddly enough,
yeah, for sure.
especially
Yeah,
a sore.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I've heard a lot of people say that they like the fact that they think he can be more versatile than Amon just as a defender,
Exactly.
as a guy off the ball, whereas Amon is probably more like a natural point guard. Um, so it's just again for them, it comes down to that shot. It's just
Yeah, it's rough. It looks bad. Even
yeah,
when they make it,
exactly.
it looks ugly.
Right, exactly. So that's always the thing, that makes it kind of, tough at times. Just when you look at, everything in regards to, they have a lot of other, great things going for them in terms of their size, their length, the athleticism. It's just that shot, because you need to be at least a decent jump shooter, I think, especially as a guard, especially if you're a ball handler.
Yes.
You got to be at least a, relatively decent outside shooter, and for them it hasn't been there yet. So hopefully the hope is that they learn, right? Because people question Scoot's outside shot, for the most part, but again, if you're drafting guys that high, you would think that they should be able to, improve on that aspect of the game, but it's not always that easy. A lot of people believe in Scoot also just because of that work ethic. Apparently he's really impressed in a lot of these interviews. So, we'll see what happens, but it looks like Shams put out, I guess that they're gonna take Miller, it sounds like.
Yeah, I just saw that. My
Yeah, so
my ESPN thing crashed. I'm trying to bring it back up.
yeah, I have the tweet deck on the side so I can
Yeah.
see the tweets that come out. But yeah, it looks like Miller's gonna go number 2. So that
Again, to
obviously
leave your
changes,
mark on
a lot of different things now because, again, with Portland, that kind of, I guess, in a way puts you in a better spot. Because again, regardless of whether or not you move on from Lillard, you're gonna have a guard that's set.
Exactly.
But at the same time, Portland, maybe they trade that third pick because everybody knows a lot of people want Scoot Henderson.
And
Because I don't think Charlotte would have traded, the pick, if they were going to take Scoot,
no.
right? But now with Portland, we know that there's, some interesting scenarios for them, depending on what they do.
I've
Um,
heard some rumblings that Portland might even be considering trading Lillard. I heard Lillard wasn't
right,
really on board with playing with a young core. He wants more help that's like, been in the league and solidified, that kind of deal. So I'm curious to see what Portland does here. I think obviously we know they're going to take Scoot, but in terms of the ramifications of taking Scoot, I'm curious, do they trade Scoot for somebody else or, I don't know. What am I looking at right now, man?
yeah, but yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this continues to go. Just because again, like the draft is always a fun time.
Yeah.
I guess we can. I guess should we? I guess should we talk about Miller? Or should we kind of wait until the pick is like actually official?
We could talk about Miller.
Yeah, so I guess Miller was your number 2 pick. He was the
Yeah.
guy that you had going number 2. To Charlotte, we both talked about it. Like I said, I like Miller. I think he will be a good player as well.
Yeah.
I didn't have him as the second pick, but I do think he's got a lot of value as a 6'9" forward that can score. He can learn. Hopefully, he can learn. Defensive schemes at the NBA level.
He can guard
Because
multiple
again, like
positions though.
yeah, exactly. Because guys like that, in fairness, don't come around too often. With that size, and skill, right? That's probably, I think, why Boston, way back when chose Tatum, and preferred him over Fultz when everybody had Fultz as kind of the, de facto number 1 pick.
Sure.
Just because again, when you got a wing, that's got a lot of guard skills and they're, relatively good athletes, that's a really, um, good thing to have, when you're, especially when you're, rebuilding.
Yeah.
Because again, like those are usually the toughest players to find, more so than say like, the skill guards.
Right.
Obviously, there are some skill guards that are one of one, right? But, again, the 6'8", 6'9", really skilled forwards, right? Those are even more so, super rare.
Yeah, but this is a big deal, man. I
The
didn't necessarily. Where's the link? W podcast. What link? Are you talking about to the draft? I mean, I can send you the draft link, or I can put it in the chat. But
Yeah,
we're just commentating on it. We can't necessarily broadcast it due to the fact that that would be extreme copyright DMCA violations. But
right.
yeah, Brandon Miller to Portland, you know, or excuse me, to
Charlotte,
Charlotte. Um, you know, I don't necessarily think that this was the best pick. I had them doing this just because I was predicting what was going to happen, but I would have
right.
preferred, Portland pick Brandon Miller. Because I think passing on Scoot is just a huge mistake, and I think we'll probably be talking about this one for a long time. Nonetheless, I think Brandon Miller is still a great option, but I don't know. I feel like Scoot was definitely the set in stone number 2. So, and I feel like what was the report? They said Michael Jordan also had the final say. I think it was
Yeah,
in
on his way
deciding
out.
this. Yeah, on his way out, he's deciding this. So it's like I don't know if you necessarily want to do that because that guy has had some horrible management issues. So I don't know. I like the pick, but I don't love it. I would have preferred Charlotte take Scoot because that's a once in a generation talent. I think personally, he's just a
Yeah,
scorer.
I
But to kind of stick on Miller, you kind of talked about it. He averaged almost 20 points per game, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, but 40% almost from the three, and that's pretty good for a 6'8" guy. Um, he's definitely like a better fit, I guess. I'm not necessarily high enough on him to say he's a franchise changer, but yeah, he's gonna help you, for sure. But he's really ready. He's definitely ready. I guess there were stretches in the tournament where he looked a little bit bad, but that happens sometimes. Some guys don't do too well in the tournament. But he is the best small forward, I think, in this draft. So it's not necessarily a complete loss. I'll give it like a lowercase W. But overall, I do like
Yeah,
Miller a lot.
yeah, I'm with you. Like I said, I like both guys. I just feel like Scoot is the guy, that you can really, really build around. And again, like, we can talk about fit. I mean, I don't really feel like it would have been too bad of a fit between Scoot and LaMelo just because,
Sure.
because LaMelo is a pretty solid shooter. And I'd be kind of interested, to see how that fit would have been, um, between those two guys, because obviously Scoot's, the more dynamic athlete, whereas, LaMelo's probably the more dynamic offensive player.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, but either way, I am kind of curious to see what Charlotte does after this, right? Because they have a number of other guys on the roster, that they have to make decisions on, right? Guys like Terry Rozier, Gordon Hayward, Miles Bridges, obviously PJ Washington and other guys like that. So they have some decisions to definitely make. So I do kind of wonder, right? Because again, like, if it's a scenario where it's like, well, we have Terry Rozier, so we don't need another guard. I'm not saying that's what it is. Maybe they just
Right,
feel
right.
like Miller's the better player. But I don't know. Charlotte's had some, rough times in the draft, obviously, where like they've, just their picks have not really been that great.
Horrid.
But yeah, exactly. But this is the one time, right, where they've been, had a really high pick, outside of LaMelo, where they had a top, three picks. So this was one that you can't mess up.
Hmm.
So obviously we got to wait to see what he looks like in the NBA because he could, come out of the gates and be really, really, really good.
Yeah.
Um, so exactly. So I'm not going to resign a team's fate just yet, but it is, it is definitely, the guy that I don't think I personally would have picked at 3. It looks like according to Woj, or
Picks
excuse me,
in.
according to Sean Squania, it looks like Scoot's going number 3, right? Which
Okay.
again, this was expected.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't think there was a big shakeup here. I think, after this is when we're gonna probably see some surprises and things of that
yeah.
nature.
Right, exactly. Because once we get to the 4th pick, right, then it becomes a little bit murkier in terms of who the best guy available is. Obviously people have tons of opinions on this, right? Like many people, like you said, Amon Thompson. Of course, there's other options as well, right? Like again, we have other guys in our mock drafts, right? Like Jarius Walker, Cam Whitmore, uh, obviously Alcer Thompson,
Yeah.
um, Taylor Hendricks. So there's a lot of options here. Um, you know, I guess my thing is for Detroit. Well, not Detroit, my bad. In terms of the 4th pick, whoops.
Yeah.
But I guess for them, um, I guess like with Thompson, with Houston, like I said, that was who I had, Amon Thompson, just because from a point guard perspective, I feel like that's kind of the guy that you need, and I think of the players left, he's probably the most talented.
Yes.
Again with the athleticism, with the playmaking, because again, like it's a good combination, I think, of talent and fit, right? Where it's
Right.
like you have, a number of other guys, that are more like one-on-one isolation scorers, right? Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., but I don't think both guys should start.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, right? Where we think it's got a little bit of redundancy in the backcourt. So I think, for Houston, that's where you get a point guard, you get Amon Thompson. Like I said, I think he's the best of the players left. And you get that athletic ability. But I guess we'll kick it off. With Scoot, right? Since he's the guy that's going to get
Yeah.
picked, we might as well talk about him a little bit more. So how what are your thoughts on Scoot? As
I,
Silver's going up to the podium, announcing the pick. I think we both are really high on him. Obviously, higher than
yeah.
Miller, but we can kind of get into it a little bit more.
I'm really high on Scoot. I think he's really good. Like, he's a quick twitch guard, speed, quickness to beat defenders off the dribble. Um, I feel like, he's not the greatest off the ball, so I feel like he's definitely a ball dominant player. So I'm curious to see how this is going to work in Portland if Lillard stays, but pure scorer pretty much. And I feel like, he does have some defensive capabilities for sure. I think he's around what, 6'2", but the athleticism I think is something that puts him leagues above certain other individuals in this draft for sure. And I feel like with his athleticism that also will translate into defense. Normally we see more athletic guys be, more willing defenders. So I think that will be something that Portland can definitely hone in him. I would have preferred to see him go number two. I think he's better than Brandon Miller. I think he's going to have a longer impact in this league for sure. It may take a little bit longer for him to reach that level, but for sure, I think he's definitely better than Miller. But not to drag on Miller. Yeah, he's just so quick. Freak athleticism. And I really, like you said, I really wish that we could have seen, a LaMelo Ball, Scoot Henderson backcourt. But I mean, we can live with a Lillard, potential Lillard and Scoot
Lillard,
Henderson
Scoot,
backcourt. Yeah, that's a
Simons.
lot of guards, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot, but
Yeah, Chris
I'm
Haynes.
sure they'll figure it out.
Yeah, Chris Haynes now putting out there that Rockets are going to select Damon Thompson number 4.
Smart. That's what we
I guess
had too.
yeah, to wrap up on the Scoot thing.
Yeah.
I mean, again, played for the G League Ignite. Out. After finishing high school, right? Average 15, 5 and 5. Right. So more of a scorer, right? But obviously he's got some, passing capabilities,
Right.
because I feel like that's kind of the modern point guard in the NBA right now, right? Where it's like you don't have to be like a guy that can average 20 points, and like 10 assists, right?
Right.
The Chris Paul type point guards, those are much more rare now, right? You kind of need to be a threat as a scorer and a passer, right? And I think Scoot can potentially do that. The main thing for him, is he's just got to work on his shot, right? Again,
Yeah.
shot 25% for G League Ignite, so that's not great. Um, and that's kind of an interesting factor with a number of some guys in this draft, right? Like the Thompson twins, not great outside shooters. Scoot, not great outside shooters. Um, but either way, I'm just kind of disappointed that Charlotte didn't take him because I
Me
just feel
too.
like he is the better guy. But again, according to Woj, Miller is the one that they've been all in on. So we'll just have to see. Because again, I think he'll still be really good. I like you said, I just feel like I'm more of a Scoot guy.
Yeah.
But
Me too.
but again, it's not like I'm in a position where I think one guy sucks and the other guy is is just really really good. I think both of them are going to be good. I just like
Yeah.
Scoot more.
But
Um,
yeah, I guess to kind of get into what was it? Amon Thompson who was drafted?
Damon Thompson.
Yeah, so Amon Thompson, he's really good. The shot is very questionable. It's rough. It's rough. Like if you want to, you can go ahead and Google clips. Amon Thompson, that's his name. But yeah, he's 6'6", or I think he's around 6'6". But he's definitely more of like a on the ball dominant kind of guy. But he can facilitate. But athletic playmaker, slashing playmaker, basically. He can play off the ball a little bit, not as well as his brother. Um, but in general, I think this is the best fit. Because that trio, you can have like Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Jabari Smith, Alperen Sengun. That's pretty good in my opinion. I think they do need to uh, you know, chisel out the edges because it is rough around the edges. But I think this is a good nucleus, if that makes sense, to build upon if you're Houston. Young pieces, very young. Um, but I don't know. I thought that Houston may have wanted to trade this pick, but I think this is still a good idea. And I think this kind of may eliminate and negate the Harden rumors, hopefully, so we can finally stop hearing
Yeah,
about that. Because I don't think Harden fits into this rotation at all
yeah.
anymore. I think it's
There's
a good
more
fit though.
rumblings. Yeah, there's more rumblings that he'll probably go back to Philly, which
That's
is
what I meant.
I
Yeah,
think what should happen in the
yeah,
first place. I feel
yeah.
like it'd be a huge mistake for Houston, to do that.
That'd be dumb.
Again, you got a ton of cap space, 60 million if I'm not mistaken. Just you're probably not going to be that great even if you get one of those guys. So again, why not use that cap space on some veteran guys, and kind of have them like just be a positive presence for the young guys in the locker room because I feel like
Exactly.
that's kind of what Houston needs. Kind of like Memphis where you just need some more adults in the room. Um, even with the Chris Paul thing, I think that's kind of the benefit if you look at it from that perspective for the Warriors is again, you just get a more, veteran adult in the room. And again, I think, there's always something to be said about I think there's a high level of value in having people who just, know what they're doing and know what to
Sure.
do in certain situations.
Yeah, you want
Again,
experience.
especially yeah, exactly. Especially, again, when you're dealing with a lot of young players, right? Who,
Yes.
they're coming into the NBA and they kind of have to, figure it out, kind of almost on the fly. So, we'll see what they do. But, again, they hired Ime Udoka, as their head coach, right, replacing Silas. And obviously he, did some pretty good work for Boston, right, in terms of getting them to the finals. Right, was let go, obviously, for certain reasons off the court, obviously,
Yeah.
but regardless, Um, it is going to be interesting to see what Houston, continues to do from this point. Because again, it was a rough time for them last year. Kind of both on and off the court.
Yeah.
Just again, like not a lot of great, not a lot of positives for them. Um, for the most part, right? Guys not getting along with the coach. And just kind of just a mess in terms of it didn't really feel like there was really a strategy or a plan for anything. I guess it helped them lose a lot of games, but
Hmm.
uh, it just now hopefully there's a little bit more of a sense of direction, in terms of where they're going to go. Um, so and I think it kind of starts with getting Thompson,
Yeah.
just again to kind of get that point guard, to kind of round everything out. It's just going to be an interesting fit because again, Green is more of a isolation one-on-one scorer, right? So you would think he needs the ball, although he's a decent shooter. But clearly he likes to play with the ball in his hands.
Right.
Şengün, obviously, he's a guy that you can run a decent amount of offense through. Jabari Smith, had a rough start to his rookie year, but I think closed strong. So he should obviously continue to get better.
Yeah. He'll
Um,
get better with time, I think.
yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they continue to develop. It's just, again, it was a rough start for them. Obviously they kind of had to accelerate the rebuild, once the Harden thing, kind of fell apart with them.
Yeah.
Um, but they're definitely in a better place now. But it's going to be weird because I think next year they don't have their pick, so they kind of do have to, kind of put together a relatively competitive team next year.
Yes, they do.
Um, so I do kind of, wonder where they're going to go from that point onwards. As it looks like Silver's going to, come in and announce the Thompson pick.
Yeah. I'm kind of getting concerned. I'm not gonna lie for the Wizards.
Hmm.
Just mainly due to the
Really?
fact that I had them picking a Sword Thompson, but I feel like his draft stock has risen a lot, and he might go probably like to somewhere like Orlando, and that would be a perfect fit for them. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know, how well the Wizards are gonna do. Sorry, that just popped into my head. I
Oh,
don't
it's
know who the
Amen Thompson.
oh, it's Amen. I've been saying Amen the whole time. Huh? Interesting.
It's like Amen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe he'll answer the Rockets' prayers because they have a lot of them, and they are not very good right now. But yeah, in general, I
Um,
like this pick. This is a good pick. I think
yeah,
this is definitely the best fit.
just kind of reiterate with the Wizards. You said you had them taking
I had them taking Osor, but
yeah, Alsor. Yeah,
I
exactly.
feel like his
I
stock
had
has risen, dude. That
yeah.
this is rough. I'm getting
Yeah, I
kind
had him
of
too.
curious to see what these other teams are going to do now, because now I feel
Yeah,
like the top four guys, they've kind of gone off the board,
right.
and this is the part where we don't
Yeah,
necessarily
this is where
know everything that's going to happen. It's not going to feel as
yeah,
scripted.
yeah, it's kind of like what we talked about, where after obviously after the number one pick is where things got interesting, right? Because you weren't sure whether or not it was going to be Scoot or Miller,
Yeah,
but then after three, right, then it gets to be kind of a just a show like a circus because then it's like after the third pick, like you said, we don't really know who's I don't really feel like anybody's a quote unquote was a quote unquote lock to go fourth.
absolutely
Obviously
not.
Thompson went fourth, and then from this point onwards. It's going to be interesting, to kind of see who goes fifth, right? Because again, on my mock draft, for five, I had Jarius Walker, right? But I mean, it wouldn't shock me at all if they ended up, picking somebody else, like you said, like Asor or maybe Whitmore. Although it sounds like Whitmore is going to fall.
Which is crazy to me. I don't know how.
Yeah, right. So there's a lot of options here, that these teams can kind of go with. And again, with a team like Detroit, um, I just feel like again, you got Cunningham and Ivy, right? Obviously, you're not in a position to just go for fit, right? But obviously, the best players are pretty much gone,
Right.
for the most part, right? So after that, you have a lot of players that are kind of in similar tiers. But for them, like I said, I feel like probably a wing, because again, I feel like the next several best players, aside from I guess from like Anthony Black, are pretty much forwards. So
Sure.
I guess the question for Detroit is, would you rather take like a more natural like wing, like 3-4, like say a Whitmore, or somebody who's more like a 4-3, like
Right.
Jarius Walker? Because they also have some other guys at that forward spot, right? Like obviously right now you have Bogdanovich, you got Marvin Bagley. Isaiah Stewart kind of goes back and forth between 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Like I said, obviously they're not in a position to go for, you know, fit. over best player, right? And again, most of these top teams aren't, right? Because that's why they're in this position. Um,
Right.
but again, like I said, I had Walker going 5. But again, it wouldn't shock me at all, if they go for somebody else, right? Because again, Whitmore was kind of the guy that was looked at as the next, guy
Oh
where
my
he
God.
kind of wrote. Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
sorry to cut you off, but Detroit
Yeah.
just picked a sore.
Oh wow, so you were right. So there you
I
go.
could
So
just feel it in my bones. So
yeah,
now
so there
Detroit
you
has the
go.
other Thompson twin, which is honestly, I'm not gonna say he's better, but I think he has potential to be better.
So
This is a big deal.
and he's more and he's more like a 2-3, so he can play alongside Cunningham and Ivy. And either
Yes.
way, Cunningham's a big guard anyway, so it's not like you have to have like a 6, 9 forward next to it. But again, this is why the draft is always fun because this one is definitely one that I don't think most people had.
No.
Because I feel like most people, like you said, had him going, a little bit lower, right? Like
Lower.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, like that 8-ish range, right? Like you said, where the Wizards are. But instead he goes to 5. So and Detroit has hit on these picks,
Yes, they have.
outside of Hayes, obviously. Because
Yeah.
I mean, like, well, Cunningham was like the lock for number 1.
Yeah. Everybody knew
Ivy,
that.
Ivy, I think is going to be pretty good. They didn't draft him, right, but they traded for Jalen Duren, right? He seems like he's really solid. Um, so they've, for the most part, aside from Killian Hayes, they've done a relatively decent job, with these draft picks. But again, I think he's a pretty solid fit because again, you have Ivy, and Cunningham, right? Both guys are, kind of score first guards.
Yeah.
Um, but it is kind of interesting, right? Because again, this is the first. I mean, you have two twins, right, and they're going back to back. I mean, obviously, I don't know. I don't know if there's ever been a draft where two twins went back to back.
Right.
We know that there are twins that have been in the same draft, but I don't know about back to back. But like you said, I'm high on him too. Just again in terms of his versatility with the athleticism. Again, it's kind of like it's just similar to his brother. Can he develop that outside shot? Because that's where he can really maximize
The
his
potential.
potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, like, and Detroit needs, some outside shooting because they have a ton of bigs. And most of them aren't really, stretch bigs, right? Bagley can shoot it a little bit, right, but not great.
Right.
Wise so far hasn't really shown like a great outside shot yet. Obviously could get better. But he's not like a knockdown stretch 5 yet. Right, Duran is more like a, classic inside guy. Um, and even like Jaden Ivey, right, kind of probably needs to develop the outside shot, more as well. So they definitely, need one of these, at least one of these guys, to become significantly better as an outside shooter. But if he pans out, that's a really solid young core, to
Wow.
build around,
I'm honestly in
these guys.
shock.
Yeah, exactly. This was our first definitely, big shocker
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure, right? Because
Holy
again,
crap.
but again, we kind of thought like, the first three, even if the order is a little bit different between 2 and 3, we knew which guys were going to be chosen from 1 to 3.
Yeah.
But 4 onwards, right? And we even had 4, right? Because we both had Amin at 4,
Yeah. We
right?
did.
And then
We
after
both did.
exactly, and then after that is where it gets really interesting.
This
This
is
is
a
a great
great
draft.
draft.
I mean, this is a
So far,
draft,
yeah.
that yeah, this is a draft, that's been looked at as having a lot of talented guys. Most people believe it's 3 guys, and then after that, you don't know which, how good the rest of the guys are going to be. But there's still a lot of, solid players in the draft after those 3 guys. So, it'd be, you can't really go wrong with the number of these guys. Obviously, it just comes down to, who you think is better, um, than the other, right? Because there are guys that are kind of in similar tiers, right? Like we know Cason Wallace, Kobe Buffkin, right? Those are 2 guys that are kind of looked at, in similar tiers. Some have one higher than the other. Then like some of the other forwards, right? Whitmore, Walker, Hendricks, right? These are all guys, that are kind of also in that similar tier. More so Whitmore and Walker, but still, right? This definitely, in terms of the draft, the mock drafts has a lot of variance because I've seen like a number of other people's mock drafts, and after that third pick, right there, there are a number of guys, that are in different spots.
Sure.
Because again, it's all based off of who you think is the best guy. For the most part, especially with these early picks, right?
Yeah.
Because
These
again,
these
as
guys
we
are
get to the
insane.
latter part of the lottery, it's more so going to be, who it is in terms of fit, right?
Yes,
Because
that's
we
how it
know,
goes.
say for a team like, you know, um, I guess like the Grizzlies, well, they just gave their pick to the Wizards, so that's probably not a great example. But say like a team like,
The Mavericks. Say the Mavericks.
yeah, yeah, well, they have the 10th pick, but
Yeah.
more like a team like say like Milwaukee, right? Or
Oh, you were
you know,
saying
say
out
like
of the lottery or in the lottery?
yeah, a team out of the lottery, right?
Oh, I
Like
thought you
more
said
like
in the
a team
lottery.
like a Golden State or
The
you know,
The
a team like
Warriors,
Denver, right?
Lakers.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. Those teams, they're not in a position where they have to have like the absolute best guy in the draft,
Yeah,
right? Because those guys are probably not going to play a whole lot for those teams, unless somebody's really hurt, right?
right.
So you can't mess those up. Um, for those top picks, right? But the latter picks is where I think there's going to be a lot of movement in terms of guys, that are probably going to get picked, in places that we didn't expect, right? But at the same time, we already have one, that was definitely kind of a shocker, right? Because again, I think most people, like you said, had Thompson a little bit lower,
Yeah, in that seven,
Osor
eight
a
range.
little bit lower, right? Yeah, exactly, closer to 8 to 10 as opposed to like top five.
Exactly. This is a
Um,
big deal. Wow.
yeah. So that definitely changes the board a lot, right? Because like you
Yeah.
said, that was what you and I both had the Wizards taking, right? And that changes things up, uh, a lot because again, now we're at a point where, there's probably another team, right, that was kind of thinking like, if he's available, we'll take him, but now they can't, right?
Yeah.
So, but I guess in a way, right, if some guys are going to rise, that means other guys will fall, right? So, like you said, you felt that Osor was probably going to rise because we had heard that Whitmore was falling.
Mhm.
So if
Yep.
Whitmore fell, right, then Osor is probably the next guy up.
Exactly.
Um, so now we kind of have to see, who's going number 6 for with Orlando, and Orlando's in an interesting spot because they have 2 first-round picks, the 6th and the 11th pick, and they have a lot of variance with what they can do.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know they have like a number of wings, um, and big guys, right? But I do feel like they probably would like to pick another guard. Sounds like now they're going to pick Anthony Black. Um,
Okay. That's a big
so
deal.
yeah, that's another guy that has risen up, right? Because he was a
Yes.
guy, that was kind of a little bit lower early on in these mock drafts, right? Say like a few months ago, right? But now he's risen and he was right outside the top five. I had him a little bit lower, but I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
Um, because again, when you look at him, that's the guy that you had Orlando taking, right?
Yes.
Because you said, they needed a guard,
Yep.
even though Markel Fultz is there, right? You'd like to have another guard, that can kind of go out there and just defend the other guards,
Mhm.
the top guards. He's a big guy, right? Loves to compete. Like
Scrappy.
yeah, scrappy guy. So he's a guy that I think Orlando is really gonna like. But it's gonna be interesting because then you look at Orlando's guard spot. They have a number of guards on their team already as well. Again, obviously, again, like I said, with these other teams, they're not in a spot where they kind of have to go for best fit. But you also have outside of Fultz, you got Jalen Suggs, you got Cole Anthony, right? So you
Yep.
have a number of other guards, that are kind of waiting in the wings. So I guess it just kind of fortifies their backcourt rotation. I'm also just kind of curious, if they maybe move one of those guys
I think one of
because I
them's
just
on their way out.
yeah, because I just don't feel like because I just don't feel like there's enough playing time for all four of those guys,
No.
right? And again, like maybe I'm wrong, but it does feel like one of those other guards, like Anthony or Suggs, might be on the move. Um, just because again, it's like I just don't think all those guys can play, even though they're all solid, right? Like
Yeah.
Fultz is obviously really good. Anthony's kind of been inconsistent offensively, but I think he can still be a decent player. Suggs has definitely been up and down. Obviously, he spent some time injured.
Injury, yeah.
Um, yeah, he was kind of the gamble pick for Orlando. But either way, it's definitely interesting, right? With Black, it said he was a wide receiver in high school, so
Yeah, he's a
that kind of
multi-sport athlete.
exactly. And those are the type of guys that I think are always really intriguing. In any sport, from a
Yes.
draft prospect, from a draft standpoint, because again, clearly, they're relatively comfortable with doing multiple things, right? Obviously, if they're doing multiple sports, that would suggest year round, right? They're constantly training and working hard. Um, so again, I feel like that's a really good pick for Orlando. So far, I've liked all of these picks.
Yeah,
Again,
I haven't had an issue with them.
like you said, I prefer Scoot over Miller. But
Sure.
regardless, like none of these picks so far, I'm like, this is a horrible
You
pick.
can't
You
be
know what I
mad
mean?
at any of them.
Yeah.
On
Like
that note,
like
I need to get some water because I'm
yeah,
completely
sure.
out. So I'm just gonna run upstairs and get some water real quick. But you're
Yeah.
gonna be
So
by
I'll
yourself for like
handle
30 seconds.
right, exactly. Yeah. So I'll handle and at this point with Black, yeah, he averaged 13 a game, 45% from the field, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. Again, the weakness for him, kind of like some of these other guys you mentioned, just not a great outside shooter. Um, And that again, that's kind of the running theme for a number of these, guards, right, that are kind of being drafted early, right? The wings, some of these wings are kind of the guys that are more polished on offense. Um, but either way, right, great at the point of attack, very disruptive, as they're, saying in the draft. So I really like the pick. Um, just again, just to add some more versatility to Orlando. It's just going to be really interesting to see kind of where they go from here. It looks like we got another riser, Indiana, Bilal Koulibaly. So it looks like Indiana's picking him. That's the other Frenchman, right, that played alongside Wenbanyama. And it says in trading him to Washington. Okay. So Washington's going to get Bilal Koulibaly.
All right, I'm back.
So you're getting Bilal Koulibaly. Indiana drafted him and is trading him to Washington. So that's a guy that I had high on my board,
I
and
had
he's
him
risen.
low, dude.
Yeah, he Indiana took him at 7,
Okay,
and
let
they're
me think
trading him
about
to
that.
Washington. So I guess so that means I guess they're kind of just exchanging picks. So,
Okay.
it'll be interesting to see who goes to Indiana. Um, but that's definitely, this is the first one where we're like, wow,
Um,
that's a change because I had him high, just because again he's very intriguing in terms of being able to do a lot of things. But 7, I feel like that's pretty high. And again, when you look at Washington, now it's going to be interesting because you got Avdia, um, you have Kispert, right? And both of those guys are fine, right? Kispert's more like a shooter, offensive guy, whereas Avdia is more like a, you know, versatile, switchy defensive wing kind of guy,
mhm.
right? Koulibaly is kind of, I guess, a mixture of both of those guys. Obviously
Yeah.
not at all the same, right? But
Mm-mm.
just in general, I mean, it is interesting. Like you said, the Osor one, I feel like probably kind of messed up the board a little bit because I do feel like that's probably who Washington would have taken if he was
Absolutely.
available. But of course it doesn't always go your way. So sometimes you kind of have to pivot. So it's going to be interesting, to see, what he looks like in Washington.
Wow.
Because
Okay.
this is definitely the first big, change in the draft. Because again, this guy we've had, two guys that rose, significantly from where they were expected to go to. So I guess if Indiana and Washington are making the trade, I guess at this point I'm assuming right that Indiana has that 8th pick. So as opposed to Washington. So I'm curious who they pick to go to Indiana. Um, Maybe this is where either Walker or Whitmore go. Unless Whitmore just continues to fall, because again, we've
I
seen
think
this,
you're
in
right. It's
previous.
probably gonna be Walker.
Yeah, and that was the guy that I had, Walker, going 5, right, and he's already dropped, because we had a number of guys go up.
Wow.
Um,
I'm honestly still in shock. I'm trying to think about
yeah,
what to say as a Wizards
yeah,
guy. Um,
hmm
I wasn't necessarily too high on Koulibaly, but I will say I thought he was a project. But if you're a project, that doesn't necessarily mean you're horrible. That just means the development process is going to be pretty lengthy. Um,
still
he's
very young.
very young. He averaged 14 points, about 5 rebounds, almost 3 assists per game as well. 35% from the three. It's okay. You kind of want to see it in that 38 range, I think. But there is upside. I feel like his two-way wing versatility is definitely clear. The upside is there. Great athleticism. But yeah, he won't be 19 until July. Um,
Yeah,
and I feel like he might.
5'11" in 2020 and grew to 6'8".
Yeah, they might need to put him in the G League for a little bit. I think that might be what
You
they
think
do.
so?
Yeah, I think he's too raw.
Yeah, I don't know because we got Jarius Walker, at number 8, so he's the next guy, right? And it seems like Washington's sending 2 second-round picks to move up for
That's fine.
Koulibaly. That's kind of interesting.
That's fine.
Yeah, because like you said, you got a glutton of picks,
Yeah,
from all
we
the
we
moves
can
that
we can
they've
live
made.
with
So
that.
exactly right. Um, but it definitely is interesting, right? Because again, this is the first, in a way, big, change that we've had in the draft, right? Because we had 2 guys, right, that moved up, much higher than I think what a lot of people expected. Um, because again, Koulibaly was probably much later in the first round, right? Probably like mid, part of the first round. But he's
I had him
again
late, dude. I had him around like 20.
but he's gone all the way up to
Wow.
7.
Okay, this
Walker going
changes
8.
everything.
Yeah, so I guess then we can get into Jarius Walker, right? He's obviously again another pretty athletic forward right out of Houston.
Hmm.
Um, had a, pretty solid season for them. Obviously, again, kind of another situation where, he can do a lot of different things in terms of his versatility. Um, mainly more of a defensive guy,
Sure.
right? That's kind of his best asset.
It's his MO.
In terms of what, huh?
It's his MO.
Yeah, exactly. Offensively, right? I think he's kind of, like we talked about with Black, more of a connector guy. You know what I mean? Right?
Mhm.
Where again, he's not like a guy that's going to create, his own offense, right? But he can shoot the three relatively okay. Obviously super athletic with long arms.
Right.
I guess, like I said, the key for him is he more of like a three or a four?
Yeah, he's 6'7", right? But he's also
Right,
two
6'7",
hundred and
six
fifty
eight.
pounds, so he's kind of
Yeah, so
like
he's a
a
big.
mini Zion, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So he's a big guy. So it's going to be, really intriguing to see, what he does with Indiana. But, I thought that this was one of those type of guys that they needed.
Yeah,
Because again, they are already set at guard, with Halliburton. Right. And, obviously you have, Miles Turner.
sure.
So at this point, right, you got a pretty decent, young group of guys, and they have other guys as well, right? Like Nemhart, Duarte.
Matherin.
But yeah, Matherin, obviously, for sure. But after that, you needed a wing, right? So,
This is
because
good though.
Indiana, I think last year, outside of Turner, was way too small, I think. There were a lot of times where I saw, Andrew Neesmith, playing power forward, and he's like 6'5", 6'6". He's not a power forward.
Right.
So, I think they definitely did, what they needed to do. In terms of getting more size, more athleticism, versatility. So I
Yeah.
like that pick for Indiana, or excuse me, for the Wizards, I guess, right?
Technically speaking, um,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, like you said,
Yeah,
we traded,
Koulibaly going to the Wizards, Walker's going to the Pacers, but
yeah,
yeah.
just to eliminate some confusion. But technically, the Wizards have picked Jarace Walker, which honestly, oddly enough, I kind of had him going to the Wizards. I think when we first did a little way too early, like draft
Yeah.
thing, and I was like, yeah, the Wizards should definitely pick him. But I really can't be mad at the Koulibaly thing because, like I said, I feel like he's a project. But Jarace Walker, um, yeah, I could see this working. Like you said, they've got a young core of guys. Um, and the future is definitely bright with this one because I feel like he does have potential to be their starting power forward.
Yeah. I guess while we're kind of just, waiting it out,
Mhm.
obviously we know the Wizards made those moves. So I guess Utah is the next one up. Because so who do you think that they're gonna take? Or I guess, like, on my mock draft, I had Koulibaly
Right.
going to
Right.
Utah.
Right. Right.
So the next guys that I have on my board that haven't been taken yet, I guess, are Whitmore,
Hmm.
and Hendricks.
Hmm.
So, do you think they're going to take one of those guys, or do you think they're going to go more for a guard, right, like Case and Wallace?
You know, it would be interesting if they took like Jalen Hood-Schifino or like Case and Wallace or somebody like that. But on my board, I had Taylor Hendricks, I believe. I can't remember right now, but I think they're probably gonna go Hendricks. I think that would help them a little bit better. He was a really good freshman. He scored around 15 points per game, 7 rebounds, but also shot like 40% from the 3-point line, on not too many crazy attempts, but it was definitely there. And he also blocked almost two blocks a game. So I feel like that's something that they could use to solidify it. But who knows? I mean, honestly, now I feel like all of our mock draft boards have been completely
Yeah.
messed up. Now even with the trade, with Koulibaly going to Washington, and really
Yep. We got.
The Thompson thing is what messed us up. But what's up?
Yeah. Oh no, the pick hasn't been in yet. It was
Hmm.
just Woj saying, talking about the second rounders that are going to Indiana.
Okay.
There's no pick yet.
Okay.
Um, but regardless, yeah, kind of going back to the Wizards, right? So a lot of change, I guess, over the last, week or so, right? You sent out Beal, you're sending out Porzingis,
Yeah.
right? You're bringing in, Poole, you're bringing in Landry Shamit, right? You flipped Chris Paul, obviously for Poole,
Yeah.
and now you're bringing in, with your eighth pick, right? You're bringing in Koulibaly. Um, so again, like we talked about on the podcast, right? It definitely seems like they're embracing this rebuild. Just kind of filling it in with the young guys, right? But again, I feel like there's potentially more moves to come because again, they have guys that I think other teams would want. They're kind of just sitting on the roster right
Yes.
now. So there's definitely potential, for them to kind of like, maybe be one of those teams, that a team, kind of says like, hey, we'll trade our pick to you, if you give us, X player or whatever.
So a new pick just
Um,
came in. Utah
yep.
selecting Taylor Hendricks, so that's the guy who I just said. Um,
Yep.
I think that's the best fit. I just said it pretty much.
Mhm.
Decent
Yeah.
scorer, but he nabs a lot of boards and can get blocks. And I think that's something that Utah definitely needs to build an identity towards. I think their defensive identity is something that can definitely be hardened out. But it would have been interesting to see, them pick up a guard. But I think this is the right approach. Get a power forward,
Yeah.
small forward kind of guy.
It's interesting because you got Markkinen, you got
Yep.
Kessler.
Yep.
I feel like Hendricks is more like a four.
Yeah. He
Um,
could play the
I
three
mean,
though.
so yeah, so I do kind of want, because last year Markkinen played mostly at the three. And I guess, he obviously succeeded, right? Because he was all NBA, all star or whatever, most improved.
Yeah.
So, and I guess at the guard spot, right, you got Sexton. But at the same time, Utah has other picks. So obviously, like, Hendricks, like you said, he's really good. He's available. So again, take the best player available. And the guy that you want, another guy that you might really like, will probably still be available,
Yeah.
by the time the next pick rolls around. Um, so, again, like you said, I think this is a good pick. He can do a lot of things because again, he was 7 on my board because I like him a lot. In terms of what he can do, like you said, as a shot blocker,
Hmm.
very versatile. 6'9", still 19. So, I mean, I like him a lot, but
Yeah.
again,
I like this pick.
um,
This is what they needed.
yeah, because again, it's like what I said before, where you got to take the best guy available. Don't worry about the fit too much. When
Exactly.
you're one of these types of teams, right, where you're
Lottery.
rebuilding. Yeah, exactly. Where you're a lottery team and you're, again, just trying to get talent in there.
Another
Because
guy
again,
who's. Oh, sorry. Continue.
yeah, 'cause again, not having talent is why you're at, why you are where you are right now.
Yeah. Another guy who I think I'm intrigued about, Jordan Hawkins. I think his draft stock may have potentially risen. I think more and more teams have liked him. The more he's gotten workouts, I had him kind of low, but in general, I thought he was a really good player. Definitely a top 20 player on my
Yeah,
board, but I couldn't put him there just because of the rumblings that I had heard. But now it seems like momentum's kind of shifting, and I
and that
thought
20.
Kobe, I thought Kobe Buffkin was, a lock for that Toronto spot, but Jordan Hawkins may go there. So that's something to keep your eyes on as well. I'm trying to see what other rumblings I'm seeing.
Yeah. I think right now because it's a commercial break, right? We'll probably be able to chill, for
Yeah.
another minute or
Yeah, yeah,
so.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so in terms of the specific pick, Wizards will send one of the 6 future second round picks they're getting from Phoenix and one of their own future seconds to the Pacers. Yeah, like that's fine, right?
You
Like
can
you're
live
just
with
giving
that.
up yeah, you're just giving up second round picks, to move up one pick. And again, you have like 20,000 trillion billion picks. So I'm, the second round. So there's nothing wrong with that,
Yeah.
especially if it's the guy you want. Um, again, I do wonder, right, who long term is going to be better, Koulibaly or Walker.
Right.
Um, because again, Koulibaly just recently started rising, whereas I feel like Walker was kind of already, in that tier of guys that was going to be top 10. So it always is kind of different, to see how that changes. But again, I think both guys should be pretty solid because again, I had Koulibaly high, um, but definitely not in the top 7, right? I had him like 9, I think. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I had him
had
9.
him fairly lower. Just because I'm not. It's not the fact that I'm low on him. It's just I think he requires a lot of work, and that's something that
Right?
we're clearly dedicated to. We acknowledge that, obviously, but I'm
Yeah, so
curious
I
to see
guess
how he looks in the summer league. That's going to be the true telltale
yeah,
sign for me.
exactly. I'm actually heading down there.
Yeah.
Obviously, we talked about it. The first half of the summer league, but still, I'll be down there, to kind of check it out. Just to see, who's there, and and
Yeah.
how things go. But I guess right now, while we're waiting, Dallas, their pick is 10th, and they're kind of one of those interesting crossroad teams, right? Because this is the first team, on this list of teams, right, that isn't necessarily rebuilding, right? Because you
Right.
have Luca as a superstar, you have Kyrie. Obviously, they're coming off of a terrible season. Um, where they went to the Western Conference Finals the year before, and then they have a rough stretch. They get Kyrie, and then they miss the playoffs. They lost Brunson. Seems like Wood's not going to come back. So there's been a lot of talk as to whether or not they're going to trade the pick, or keep it. I feel like they're probably going to trade it because again, I don't know who's necessarily going to be drafted at 10 where that's going to, drastically change their fortune more so than, guys that are around the league that are available right now.
Yeah.
But with the draft board changing, there is definitely potential, for them to still pick up a guy that could help them. I had Black at 10,
Hmm.
even though I knew he was probably going to go higher, but I did have him at 10. Um, so the guys that I have that are still available, right? I have Whitmore still available,
Hmm.
um, and then Wallace is available. So I
Yeah.
guess between those two, maybe one of those two guys get picked.
I had
It's just
Case
kind
and
of a matter of
Wallace.
yeah, it's just kind of a matter of whether or not they trade the pick, right? Because if they trade the pick, then they'll be picking for, whomever they're giving the pick to.
Right.
And we don't know what's happening yet. But I feel like you said, of those two, probably Wallace, because again, you already have scoring. You do need more wings, right? But again, Whitmore's more of like a scorer. He's not really like a
Absolutely.
defensive guy. Obviously if he can, play defense, at a high level, right, then you got that extra size, right? But
Yeah.
again, at the same time, you do have Luca, right? And he's, a big guy, right? So you can factor that in as well, where you don't necessarily have to go for a wing, but I don't know, because again, I'm kind of almost basing it off of I just don't know if they're going to use the pick, because I just feel like
Yeah.
for them, they could probably get again somebody who's already an NBA level guy right now, if
Yeah.
they trade that, but we just don't know, and we're
This
kind of
is
just
this is
waiting around.
interesting, man.
Yeah, so we're kind of just waiting around right now, because Silver obviously he's still on the Utah part, right? But obviously everything on Twitter, as you said, as you go online and look, all those reports are coming, before you see it on TV. So
Exactly. Sorry if we're spoiling for anybody who's watching, but we're
yeah,
just
exactly.
reporting, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so I guess, I mean, I don't know. I guess for you, do you think
What's up?
Dallas is going to trade the pick, or do you think that they're going to end up keeping it?
They should trade the pick, but it wouldn't surprise me if they keep it and pick Wallace. I think Wallace is really good. I think that's somewhat of he has shades of Brunson, if that makes sense. Can
Right.
play off the ball.
Oh,
Um,
here we go.
it won't
Oklahoma
hinder.
City is acquiring Case and Wallace
There you go.
from Dallas at
That's what I
10.
thought.
So that means that if Oklahoma City's getting that pick, who are they giving to Dallas?
True.
Um, Davis Bertan. Dallas is trading Davis Bertans and Case and Wallace at number 10 to Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Okay. So what is Dallas getting back? Because you clear salary. So I'm trying to think. Could it be like a Lou Dort maybe?
Maybe that would be
I'm thinking in
interesting.
terms of salary, Bertans, has a pretty hefty salary, right? He's,
Yes, he does.
probably like what 17, 18 million. So
Yeah,
I feel like
courtesy of
that's
us,
probably yeah. So that's
Wizards. That is.
probably yeah. So that's probably the guy. If I had to guess, that's probably the guy in the trade, and that would make sense. But again, I don't want to speculate just yet because it hasn't happened yet. But if they actually do get Lou Dort, I like that for Dallas because again, that's a guy that you can put defensively on all the other tough guards in the NBA. You still don't necessarily have like that wing guy, but again, you need defense anyways. But
Who
we'll
did they
see. I'm just
trade?
thinking,
I'm so confused.
I'm thinking it's him because let's see. OKC sends number 12 and a trade player. Oh wow, so it's just an exception. Oh wow,
Really?
so they're not getting any players, I guess.
Well, that's a horrible freaking
Well,
trade.
so they traded down. So they traded down to 12.
I don't understand the logic. I'm
So
sorry.
they're getting off the Bertans contract, so that
So it's a
frees up
salary
salary.
dump. Okay.
It's a salary dump. But, I feel like something else has to be, you know, in the works if you're Dallas. Because with the trade player exception, that means you can just absorb a player in. So with that trade player exception, that means they could probably, just grab a guy, in a trade and they don't have to give anything back in terms of players outside. They'll probably send them that pick. Um,
Right.
But I guess now that we know Oklahoma City's going to take the 10th pick, I guess my question is, who are they going to pick?
Yeah.
Because again, they're in an interesting position where they have, great guard play. So they don't necessarily need to have, another guard in that starting lineup. But at the same time, could just be looking at a guy, to kind of help you in terms of your bench play.
They might take
So
Derek. They might take Derek Lively, but I
Lively.
don't know. I
And
don't
that's
know.
kind of interesting because
That's
on my
what you
mock
have.
draft, I did have him, going, I think it was 12.
Yeah.
So he was definitely a guy that I had, and 12 was the Oklahoma City pick.
Exactly. That's
So
my
he was
point.
definitely a guy, that I had a little bit higher. I wasn't quite high enough to have him in the top 10,
Right.
but I have him higher than I think others did. But
Yeah, I had
it
him
is going
around
to be
19.
right, yeah. But it is going to be interesting to see what Dallas does because again, like you got off the Bertans contract, so that's a good thing. You got a
Right.
or a trade exception or whatever.
Right.
So that means you can just absorb another player's salary in without having to exchange another player. So that's definitely a win. I'm just curious as to whether or not they keep the 12th pick. So that probably buys them a little more time to see if they can actually bring in somebody. Because if they can bring in somebody and get off the Bertans contract, then that's pretty much, in my opinion, a pretty solid deal. But again, it's not done yet. So we'll have to
Right.
see what they do.
I'm curious. I don't know. This is interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, this has
So
been more eventful than I actually thought
yeah, exactly.
early.
And there were reports and a lot of, insiders believe that this was going to be the type of draft where there's going to be a lot of trades and I think part of it is with the new CBA. Um, it's going to be really important, for these teams, to kind of like make sure, hey, that get these draft picks right, because again, they're cost controlled guys.
Yeah,
And just, I feel like a lot of teams probably feel like, hey, we have a chance to really do something next year. There is no more dominant, super team. Obviously Denver is really good and they won the title, right? But there's no guarantees that they win it again next year. Um,
absolutely.
so, in terms of these type of trades, it makes sense. I'm just curious, I thought that Dallas was getting back a player, but if they're getting an exception and a pick and they just traded down, I kind of wonder what's next after that. Because we know, Case and Wallace is going to Oklahoma City, I guess. So I guess I kind of messed up earlier when I mentioned who is Oklahoma City going to take. It's Case and Wallace.
Okay.
So I guess the next pick is pick 11. That's Orlando. So who do
Right.
we think Orlando is going to pick at 11?
Orlando at 11. Oh, that's for sure Grady Dick. I think that's a lock.
Okay.
That's who I
Yeah.
had.
So
You
out of
know,
Kansas.
yeah, he's a forward from Kansas.
Mhm.
He's around 6'6", 204, but he's one of those guys where he was a true freshman, but he shot 40% from beyond the arc, and that's where most of his stuff was from. Most of
And
his
he can do
creation
things
was from
other
the
than
three.
shoot.
What'd you say?
And he can do things other than shoot. He's not
Oh
just a
yeah,
spot up shooter.
yeah,
I can feel like, you look at him, you feel like he kind of is just like the prototypical, just spot up catch and shoot guy, but he can do other things with the ball.
yeah.
He's a solid scorer.
He's thrown down some dunks, so don't let the appearance fool you. He can jump. Um, I feel like he's definitely athletic enough to defend multiple positions. Um,
Right.
and I think this is something Orlando needed. We talked about it in our mock draft thing. We were talking about their lack of shooting. I think this is something that would definitely help them. A guy who shot 40% from the three in college. I think that's going to translate very well to the
Right.
NBA level for sure.
Yeah.
So
And then
that's the
with
way I'm
Wallace
looking
in
at it.
Oklahoma City, I think that makes sense. Just getting another guard that can,
Sure.
go out there and be a pest defensively.
Yeah.
You already got a ton of offense, with Shea, with Giddy, right? Chet, should be a solid, two-way guy,
Yes.
right? Jalen Williams. So you have a number of guys that can do a lot of different things. So it kind of makes sense, to get another guy that can kind of, pester the smaller guards, right? Because
Right.
Shea obviously is a really solid, it has grown defensively, right? But you probably would also have like to have another guy, that in certain lineups you can, put him out there and have him again guard other
Right.
guys, on the perimeter. And
Yeah.
he's got offensive game as well, right? For sure.
Yes.
Um, it's just it is going to be interesting, to kind of see, as this draft continues to go on, because like you said, there's been a lot of changes, in terms of guys, getting picked higher than I think many people expected, right? Because
Absolutely.
Asor, right, obviously was a guy that rose. Koulibaly was a guy that rose. Whitmore drastically fell, right? Because we're already, coming to 11, and he still hasn't been picked yet. Um, so it definitely is kind of really cool, to always watch the draft and see all these changes.
Yeah.
Just because again, there's a lot going on. I'm just really curious what Dallas does because again, like we know that they've cleared up, some salary, right? But I just feel like that they're probably, going to try to, bring somebody in. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if they can do that, on the same day of the draft. I mean, I guess assuming the trade is officialized, I guess that doesn't happen until draft day, I guess, which is going on right now. But still, like, there's a lot of options here, for Dallas. I guess it's just again, if all they did was trade down and just clear salary, I mean, okay. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess that's better than before, right? But
Right.
not
Right.
by
Right.
my opinion. But
This is
still,
I'm honestly kind of shook. I'm still kind of reeling from
Right.
the
Looks
earlier
like
trade
Orlando
and this one. What's up?
Jet Howard.
Jet
Orlando's taking
Howard?
Jet Howard.
That's
Now
high.
he's a guy that I had him at 20.
That's high.
Now I think people had him like in the teens,
And
right?
that's
Like the mid.
Juwan Howard's son, correct?
Right. Yes. From yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Michigan.
Yeah.
Right. Not really a power forward, more like a
Right.
wing guard. But yeah, I mean, like 6'8".
Wow.
Not really
Okay.
short arms though. He's got like a 6'8" wingspan at 6'8".
He's pretty
Um,
much a pure shooter in my opinion. I feel like I have questions about his overall game
right.
outside of the shooting. So that's an interesting pick. All right.
But man, that is another guy. That's another guy that has rose significantly.
And
Um,
who picked him? This is Orlando.
Orlando.
Wow. They picked Jet Howard over Grady Dick. I think that's a mistake.
So that's interesting. So now they picked up two guards, one that's more like a defensive guy, one that's more of an offensive guy. Both guys relatively, big for their positions. But I mean, it does make sense for Orlando in the sense
Yes.
of like it's very clear like that they are kind of a team, that likes to, play a lot bigger, right? Because last year they had one of the biggest starting fives at different points, right? They had
Mm-hmm.
Fultz, big for a point guard,
Mm-hmm.
right? They had Franz Wagner at shooting guard, who's like
Yeah.
6'9", 6'10".
And he's
We
really
saw
more of a
Paolo at
three.
times play small forward.
Yeah.
And then we saw Bol at 7'2" and Wendell Carter Jr., right? Obviously, the starting five changed over time.
Sure.
Um, but it's clear they like these big, long, athletic guys, um, for their team. It is interesting because I did wonder what Orlando was going to do, just because, again, like, they had two lottery picks, which none of these other teams had. So there's a lot of versatility you could do there in terms of keeping both picks, trading the pick. Um, Again, it makes sense what they're doing in terms of using both picks, but I mean, goodness, I mean, it's just this has definitely changed a lot, um, in my opinion. So it's just
Wow.
this is I
This is
think
blowing it up.
this is I think the absolute shocker pick because I don't know if
Yeah.
anybody had him,
I had him fairly low. And that was not due to that was nothing really against him. It's just like I said, my concerns are everything but the shooting. I think the shooting is the only part of his game that I'm like, okay, yeah, he's gonna be really good at. But wow, okay. But I guess, like you said, it does make sense because Orlando did need some shooting, so that does help them. Similar to Grady Dick in terms of the percentage, it's around 37. Um, and that's honestly gonna get better, I think, for sure. But
yeah.
woo,
This
interesting.
So this definitely changes up the draft board, because we're getting to pick 12, which will be Dallas, I guess, right? Because
Yes.
obviously Oklahoma City and Dallas swapped
Right.
picks. And I'm at this point now, I'm kind of curious what Dallas does with that pick, right? Because they have it right now, they haven't traded it yet.
Right.
Um, so I guess now that we're at 12, I mean, in terms of who's available, I mean, we know the types of players they need, right? Obviously, either some type of wing, or some type of big, right? So is it possible that this, could be like maybe the lively pick, or maybe they choose Whitmore here, or because I mean, it's just again, there's a lot that's changed. I mean,
Yeah.
because again, with Howard getting picked here, that completely changes the board, by a significant factor. Because I think there were teams that wanted him,
Sure.
um, right, but, I don't think anybody expected him to go right outside the top 10, but
Wow.
I think that's kind of the theme so far in this draft is where we've seen a number of guys rise, um, much higher than I think expected.
Yeah.
Because again, like you said, he was a guy that I had like closer to 20. Asor I had closer to 10. Um, and Koulibaly I had closer to 10, right? And all three of those guys rose. And again, Whitmore I had at 6.
Yeah.
So clearly he's kind of the guy that unfortunately, has kind of gotten the shaft in a way where, now he's dropped, you know, borderline almost outside of the lottery, right? Because we only have 3 more lottery picks, 12, 13, and 14.
And I don't think he
Um,
fits in any of these.
you got Dallas at 12. I think Toronto at 13.
I don't think he fits
Um,
in Toronto.
yeah, exactly. So I mean,
And
you're
then
kind of at an interesting,
mm,
crossroads now, like I mentioned before with some of these other picks. Um, so I mean, I'm not gonna lie, this has definitely been a very intriguing draft. In terms of how it's gone, right? Just
yeah.
because again, a lot has happened, in terms of guys, going up and going down all over the place. I think New Orleans was the one also at 14. So you
Yeah,
got yeah, exactly. So, if he doesn't fit any of those teams, I mean, I don't know because again, New Orleans is pretty much set with their wings. I think as is Toronto kind of, unless maybe they're thinking about moving Siakam, but it sounded like earlier they probably weren't going to move him. Um so I don't know. I mean, it's there's
this
really
is
been a lot changing that's been going on. It looks like Dallas is going to pick Derek Lively. So that was, kind of what I was saying. So I'm
okay.
curious as to whether or not they actually, what they do. I mean, I guess if they trade it down, I guess they don't really have to trade the pick now. Unless
Yeah,
they end up, getting somebody like closer to the offseason, we'll see. But
and I guess that's
um,
somebody who's kind of fits better than Christian Wood, you know. So, huh?
he's young, he's on a
Yeah,
relatively cheap obviously he's gonna be on a rookie contract.
yeah.
Um,
Great
so
defender.
yeah, exactly.
I think
More of a
Luca will
defensive
make him
point.
better too.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, yeah,
Wow. Okay.
and it's funny, I had him going exactly 12, but I had him going to
Right, right,
Oklahoma
right.
City as opposed to Dallas. But either way, I think, either team, if they had taken him, I mean, that works. So and again,
Okay.
like you said with Dallas, I think Luca will make him better, in terms of being able to play off him. He kind of loves throwing those lob passes, to the big. So it's definitely been really fun so far, I think. I'm
Yeah.
I'm really
Yeah, this is fun. I mean, like, and that's the beauty of it. You know, you don't know what's going to happen. It's cool to see your predictions come true, but I think it's even cooler to see things like this happen where the board is completely messed up and now nobody really has the exact, draft board or anything like that. So
I
now
it's
everything's
been
really
really
up in
messed
the
up.
air.
Yeah, because it's definitely messed up, I think, a number of teams. Because again, I feel like Howard was a guy that teams wanted, but probably not enough to pick him, in the top 10. And then Orlando takes him, and it's like, wow.
It's a
Um,
gamble, but I think it's going to pay off.
yeah,
Now thinking about it more and more, I think this was the right move. But to see Grady
yeah,
Dick fall, I think that's another interesting thing to talk
yeah,
about.
right. And he was a guy that I had, I think around 16 anyway. So we're getting pretty close, to that, you know, end of the lottery, tier, right? Because I think I had him going 16, I believe.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had him at 16. So and 16, at least right now, is Utah.
Right,
So which and technically it's Minnesota's pick, but it's Utah's because of the Gobert trade.
right.
Um, so yeah, a lot of things are changing right now. But
Wow.
yeah, I like that pick for Dallas again because, like you said, um, he's a guy that's a really solid defender. He's a big, and that's kind of what they needed. And again, combined with the Bertans thing, you get off his money, so that gives you a little bit more flexibility in free agency. So that's a pretty solid move, I think, by Dallas.
Yeah.
I feel like obviously it's very possible they could do more. Um, but either way, it's been really cool so far.
Yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, man. This is cool. Um, trying to think. So who's next on the clock? It's
Yeah, next up is Toronto.
okay.
So obviously with Toronto, we know obviously they had a really rough season.
Right.
In terms of like, being a really bad team, they're in the play-in and then they get knocked out. Again, I feel like guard is probably what they're gonna do because again, I don't know what's gonna happen with Van Vliet. Gary Trent Jr. opted in, so maybe he stays, but regardless, even if they keep Van Vliet, I feel like it would still be nice, to have a guard, to kind of be like that future guy. Because again, Van Vliet's about 30.
Hmm.
He's going to turn 30 soon. So obviously, he's not going to be a guy, that you can have for the next, several years from this point on. Especially because I feel like he'll probably start declining, as he gets a little bit older, just because, again,
Right.
he's a small. Um, I mean, I had Jalen Hood Scafino at 13. I mean, of course, at this point, it wouldn't shock me if some other guy got taken at 13. But I had them taking a point guard because I just feel like again that's the one that I think kind of makes sense.
Hmm.
Because again, I feel like with Barnes and Siakam, you don't really have to have a wing here. You have Pirtle. Again, like I said, obviously you want to take the best available, but at
Right.
this point, in terms of these next few guys available that are the best ones, be like their guards. Like you mentioned, Grady Dick, Scafino, right? Guys like that. Right? Because in terms of the bigs, right, there's no real bigs there. that you should probably take at this point. Um, and then wings, I guess Whitmore's there, but again, you have Barnes, so it's like, I don't know if they're gonna do that. So I feel like a guard is probably who they're gonna pick.
Right.
I think you had a guard as well, but you had a different guard than me on your mock draft, right?
Yeah, I can't remember who it was. Yeah,
I
but
thought it was Bumpkin, right?
I think it was Buffkin. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it was. It was. It was.
Yeah, I think it was Buffkin. So I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, all the guys that I had towards the top, have been taken aside from Whitmore. So I'm curious what Toronto does because again, they're in a different position from those other teams because they're in this weird spot where they do have Siakam who's really really good,
Yeah.
but they're also not that good of a team. So it's like, you know, I wouldn't pick somebody that's like you know just fit. Because again, like that's why I have them with the guard. Because again, I just feel like the guards are the best guys right now that are available. And you're a team that's gonna probably rebuild soon, anyways, right? Even if
Right.
Siakam stays, right? Like you might just build around him, with Barnes. So like I said, that was my um rationale for them taking him. Also, he's a bigger guy, really good defensively. I know Van Vliet's a decent defender, but he's also small,
Right.
right? Whereas Hood's bigger. Not a great three-point shooter, right? More of a mid-range guy. Um, but still, like that's who I have. But again, like there's been a lot of changes. So maybe they take a guy like a Grady Dick or a Kobe Buffkin.
Right.
Because again, there's a lot of decent guards here that I think that they can definitely take, right? And
Yeah.
even if they don't take a point guard, like I said, if they take Dick, who's more of a two guard, that works as well, I think.
Right. Yeah. This is interesting, man. Because I'm looking at it, my mock draft now. Leonard Miller, somebody who hasn't been picked yet. He was pretty high on my
Yeah,
list. I think I had him number 12. Um,
I had him, I think, at 18, so I had
yes.
him lower.
Yeah, and I had Koulibaly at I think 15. So that's interesting. Um, I guess guys to watch out for: Keontae George, Chris Murray, um, Jordan Hawkins still. Oliver, Oliver, Maxence Prosper for sure. That's kind of getting later down the line, but definitely guys that are still available. But in terms of the lottery, Kobe Buffkin, I think, is definitely a solid choice. Jalen Hood, Scafino for sure. Um, but yeah, man, this is shaking it up. This is a lot. I mean, I don't really know what to say until somebody gets picked because I'm really still in awe about all the things that have gone down. I guess to talk about the Mavericks, what does this do to like their salary cap? Because what this frees up around like what 96 or 86 million, right?
So, like, with Bertans, you get off his contract, they're still over the cap,
Right.
but I think they'll have a little bit more flexibility in terms of having like the mid-level exception,
Okay.
so you could probably get a somewhat better player in free agency. And then also by creating an exception, they could trade a player to the team and not have to give anything up.
Okay.
I had what is Bertans like close to 20 million or something, right? So I think you can fit up to that exception. So let's say he makes like 18, you can just trade for a guy that makes like 18 million or less and just bring him in and you don't have to send back out salary.
Okay.
Um,
That makes
because
sense
again,
then.
I think they're able to do that because Kyrie's a free agent, so like he just has a cap hold. He doesn't
Right.
have like an act, salary just yet. Um, but there's definitely, like I said, a lot of flexibility with what Dallas can do. It's just
Wow.
like, like you said, it's just, I'm just curious, in terms of do they go veteran hunting? Because I feel like that's what you kind of have to do with
You
Luca.
should.
But if you end up keeping Lively, I guess again that's a fine guy to have, because again
Yeah.
he's really good defensively, great shot blocker, great around the basket. Um, and again, they don't have to have, like, a guy like a Wood, he's a good offensive player, right? But, it doesn't give you a whole lot defensively. I feel like he's kind of been a guy that was talked about, very highly, a few years ago, but it
Hmm.
just feels like he kind of hasn't like, panned out in the way that people were hoping for. Not even
Right.
that he's bad, but it's just, I feel like most people were kind of looking for him to be, better defensively, a little bit more mature, because it just seems like the last couple of stops he's been at, the team has, kind of been just okay with just letting him go, right?
Right.
Houston traded him for basically nothing. And then Dallas just seems like they're gonna just let him walk.
Right.
So, again, like that's I'm curious to see where he goes, kind of in free agency. But obviously this is all about the draft right now.
Yes, sir.
Because again with Toronto, I feel like guard play. Because regardless of what happens with Van Vliet, um, and then after that, right, like probably another big that can help you as a shot blocker. But I feel like right now, like the guard is probably the most pressing one because again, I don't know what's gonna happen with Van Vliet because
Yeah,
he could go, because he's obviously looking for a lot of money, and I feel like there are probably teams that would want him, but at the same time, it wouldn't like completely shock me if Toronto just decided to just bring him back. But I just don't feel like you're going anywhere if you do that. So
sure. Oh man, this is
yeah, so
everything's
we're kind of
messed
just
up, man.
waiting. Yeah, so we're kind of just waiting for Toronto, right now. So I guess kind of. I guess while we're kind of just waiting for Toronto's pick, what has been your favorite, I guess, pick so far?
Okay.
In terms of like what you've kind of like the most.
Well, here's what I'll say. I think the one that I've liked the most, obviously, Wemby.
Mhm.
But the
Yeah,
exception
yeah,
the exception to that would probably be Osor Thompson. I think that was a huge
yeah.
um I'm not going to say steal, but a great move. I think they analyzed it. They took their time with it. They know what they're going to get with him. They know the potential's there, and they definitely know that he's going to fit well and mesh well with the guys that they have there now. Because Detroit, I don't think is going to be horrible this season. I think they're going to be better than they were this
They could,
season for sure if everybody stays healthy. But
yeah,
yeah, I like Asor here because the thing is, he has the potential. We've said this multiple times to be better than his brother, and his brother is going to be very good. So, if like you said, if he can figure out that shot, he's going to be deadly. And he has the ability to play that three spot, which is something that his brother doesn't. His brother's more 1-2. That's it. But
right.
you know, Asor can play arguably the 1, 2, and 3, more so the 2 and 3. Off ball capabilities are great. So I think they've definitely shaken things up, and I think that's why it's also a great pick because now they've kind of put everybody in a scrambling position where it's like, whoa, 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 that wasn't supposed to happen. Now they had to reanalyze, see, okay, well maybe if we pick this guy, such and such will happen. Look at what just happened with the Wizards, things like that.
Right.
So now you're forcing everybody's hand, which is also a key part in the draft as well, because people don't realize it's not all teams, working together. There's also teams that are working against some others. So it's definitely still a competition. So that's kind of why I like this pick.
Again, so far we haven't really seen a ton of teams really like, trade their picks. But at the same time, we're not quite at that realm of like these contenders are, picking teams, or
Right.
picking players now. But I can't really be mad about the pick because again, like, I feel like, from a guard perspective, that seems, acceptable.
Best
Because again, like,
available.
yeah, because again, you needed a guard, that can, defend, and he can definitely do that. The shot still needs, kind of a, still kind of a work in progress, but regardless, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't really have a problem with it, but it is kind of interesting because, like I said, I feel like there are, I'm sure there's probably like some fans that are like, why didn't we take Cam Whitmore? But again, I feel like if he's falling, probably for a reason.
There's something we
Um,
don't know yet.
yeah, exactly. So, I don't really have an issue with it. It is just kind of interesting because, again, like, not the guy that I would have expected to be there. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, there's certainly, I guess, other options you could go with, but I just don't know what the Lakers are going to do. So it's like, I don't know if they're actually going to keep the pick. That's the problem, in terms of how I feel about it.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Um, I'm doing some research on
yeah,
what people are saying about Whitmore right now. Um,
yeah, it just seems like his medicals, just seem like it's,
so
just not great
so this is
from
what
what
I'm
I,
hearing. Whitmore was seen struggling at times with his shooting and intensity during his individual team workouts. Well, that's not a
okay.
good sign. So that means
Yeah,
they think that he looked tired, and inconsistent.
okay.
That's rough.
Yeah,
Um,
that's because he's supposed to be, kind of a scorer shooter type guy, and if he's
yeah,
kind of struggling at that, then yeah, like you said, that's definitely rough.
yeah, and like I think it was what? Let's see. So he was on the sidelines for, his first 7 games of college due to a thumb injury. He did return, he averaged like uh, 12 and a half points, 5 rebounds. And he won Big East Rookie of the Year. So this is a big fall.
Right.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay.
And my mistake, I believe Hood Scafino is like 6'6". He's not
Y-
6'4".
Yeah. Okay.
That's
Um,
that's uh that's my mistake.
okay, yeah. Um,
Dave McMenamin of ESPN, he has him as 6'6". But I thought he was like 6'4". So
I thought he was
maybe I
6'4" too.
yeah,
I
that's what I
swear he's
thought.
6'4". Okay.
But I'll look him up.
Um,
Yeah, because I swear, like you said, he was 6'4". Um, no, he's six
wow.
six.
They really are okay. There's a lot on Whitmore, so it seems like there's a host of injuries that are nagging him and seem to
Okay,
have been affecting his intensity during the
and that
individual
yeah,
team workouts. And those are kind of
oh,
the most important ones. Like I feel like
right,
the combine puts you on the map, but then once
right,
you pique the interest of these teams, that's
mhm,
when you need to be shining at your brightest. So that is not a good sign for him. Unfortunately, you hate to really see it because I feel like every year there's like a player that we expect to hear his name called really early in the draft, but then it falls extremely short. We had, like you said, Michael Porter Jr. Then a huge one, which I'm. It's kind of curious that we didn't even mention this was Bol during his draft.
yeah,
He fell
yeah,
from first round lottery all the way to second round, I believe. So wowzers. That's kind of just what happens. It happens every year. And normally those guys, they do somewhat return to form and live up to um, their floors. At some point, it may be 1 to 2 to 3. Wow, holy, that sounded so stupid. One,
yeah,
1 to 2, or maybe even 3 years down the line. But
yeah,
that's why his draft stock is sliding. That's
right.
unfortunate, though.
Yeah, it does suck. Yeah, like I said, going back to Scafino,
Yeah,
yeah, I
what's up?
mean, just again, not a great fan of the fact that he's not really much of an outside shooter.
Mhm.
'Cause I do feel like that's something that the Lakers definitely need.
Yeah,
But at the same time, right, like again, I'm not going to complain too much about like, a big guard that can defend. But I would have liked probably somebody who's a better outside shooter. But again, I
sure.
don't know what they're going to do with the pick.
Right,
Um,
they could move it, like you said.
like even if a trade doesn't happen tonight, it could still happen
Right,
later, in the off season, or it could happen tomorrow. So, but assuming they keep the pick, right? Because that's kind of what we're looking at. Assuming they keep the pick, I'm, that again, that's fine. Like I said, that was a guy that I didn't know quite as much about, but still.
sure. Yeah, he had a
Okay,
good
this
season though.
is interesting.
What's
Huh?
up?
There was one mock draft that has him as 6'4", but everywhere else I go, he's listed as 6'6".
Is it
So
CBS?
no.
Okay, because there's one mock draft on CBS that has him as 6'4" as well.
Okay, so that's interesting. So I
Six
guess
four two
nobody knows.
seventeen.
Yeah, so I guess nobody knows whether or not he's 6'4" or 6'6", but
Who knows? Either way, he's
regardless,
still a pretty big guard. He's 217 pounds, so
yeah.
the frame is there.
So I guess
What's up?
to go back to Miami,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
So they're up
true.
next.
They're on the clock.
Who the heck do we think they're gonna pick? I mean, I feel like, in terms of a wing, I mean, I don't have an issue with that, or like,
Right,
maybe a four, because I
right.
definitely feel like they need some more, size out
Well,
there. I think I had Leonard Miller
okay,
going
yeah.
there.
That's
See,
I think what's gonna happen. Oddly enough, I had Jet Howard going there, so that tells you kind of where I had him on my list. So now
yeah,
that Jet Howard's off the board, I pretty much agree with you. I think Leonard Miller would be there. He averaged 17 points, 10 rebounds. Pretty much a guy that's going to, give you pretty much a solid double double every night. And I think that's something that Miami could definitely use,
yeah,
considering the fact that they're a somewhat undersized team themselves. So
that's
to
how I
get another 6'9" guy that can grab boards alongside Bam, give him some help on the board, significant help. That would be a huge help. He wasn't really a great 3-point shooter, around 30%. It's kind of rough, but from a small forward, power forward kind of guy, I feel like that's acceptable. It's passable.
yeah,
Definitely can develop it. And he played for the G League Ignite, FYI. So that's something to also watch. Um,
yeah.
so that's pretty good.
Yeah, because I'm kind of under the assumption and expectation that Whitmore is probably just going to continue to fall.
He's
Um,
going to fall, and unfortunately, he may even fall into the second round,
yeah.
which would be
Now
insane.
maybe he moves into that Golden State realm, like I said, where maybe they
Right?
take a chance on him. I don't
Right?
know. But it just feels like at this point, that he's going to keep falling. And like you said, that's rough because he was projected to be like top five, and
I had him
now we're
top five,
like,
man.
yeah, exactly. I had him at 6, and now we're almost at 20. And he still hasn't gotten picked, so it looks like the Heat pick is in. So I guess.
We're just waiting
Uh,
on it, huh?
Yeah, so we're just kind of waiting on it. So looks like they're taking Jaime Jaquez Jr. So that
Okay.
was your guy that you had
That
at 17. So except now he's just going 18. And that's fine. Again, like I said, I would have preferred maybe like more of like a 4,
me too.
but I said probably some type of wings. We're both kind of thinking like some type of forward, like you said,
Sure.
either somebody, with size, on the wings, or like you said, somebody, that can kind of help, Bam around the interior.
Sure.
But again, he's a guy that, Miami likes picking these guys, right? Where, like again, they're a little bit older, right? But
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of ready to come in. He's 22, he's 6'7", 230, so he's, a relatively big guy.
Right.
Um, he can do a lot of different things. So I do like him. Again, I didn't have him this high, right? I had him like, closer to the bottom of the first round. But I knew he was definitely a guy, that was probably going to rise because it seemed like a
Right.
lot of people liked him, especially because, like you said, he had a pretty good run for UCLA,
Right.
this year. So, I think
Yeah.
that's a pretty solid pick for Miami. And it kind of just, again, it feels like it's kind of been a thing where they picked a lot of these types of guys, right? Where, they're able to contribute right away. And they haven't had like a ton of like, those type of draft picks, but just to
Right.
kind of fit in right with guys like Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, Struce Robinson. Assuming those
Yeah.
guys stay, right? I think that's a fine fit. For Jaquez.
Yeah, I think that's a good fit. He's seasoned senior, so he's 22. He averages around 18 points, 8 rebounds, so he's pretty good. Um, some people list him as like a small forward. Some people have him listed as a two guard. I think he's more of like an undersized three, honestly. But he's savvy, experienced guard. Um, Definitely could be a creator and a scorer, but he's really tough because he battled a lot of injuries. But that seems his injury history seems like it hasn't really affected him to the degree of Cam Whitmore, and I think that's because most of his injuries were throughout his career. So it's kind of like that the injuries are there, but they haven't necessarily affected him. Meanwhile, you're looking at Whitmore, and it's like you could clearly see they're definitely still nagging him. Um, Even in his workouts. So that's not a good sign. But overall, I think this is a good pick for Miami. So, oh, next up is the Warriors, I believe, right?
Yep, exactly.
This
So
is
again,
intriguing.
like I said, we're kind of at this point now. I guess Houston's at 20, so they're not in the same tier, but
But that was
you
via
know,
the Clippers, though.
yeah, exactly, via the Clippers. So, in terms of Golden State, right, they have a lot of options here. Again, I feel like maybe, after getting rid of Poole, maybe you kind of want to bolster that guard depth a little bit more.
Right.
Or maybe you want to pick a big here.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had at 19, I think I had Whitehead here.
Okay.
Um, in terms of the guard depth. Um, but again, like yeah, there's definitely been a lot of changes here, in terms of the board. So, maybe they're a team that picks, somebody else because, I have, kind of in this realm, right? Obviously, taking kind of Whitmore out of the equation, right? I got, Chris Murray,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, uh, Nick Smith Jr., right? James Najee, right? Sensabaugh, Clowney, right? So, this is kind of like where we're kind of in this interesting realm.
Right.
Like I said, I feel like a lot could happen here. Um,
Here's something that's kind of interesting.
mhm.
Brandon Podziemski, I think that's how you say his name. Probably
Oh
just
yeah,
butchered it, but this guy, he could be the Pool replacement. Pretty much
yeah.
a
I feel
pretty
like
good scorer. So
yeah, I think he could fit in really well with them, like you said, especially because again, shooter, smart player. Um, so I feel like that's definitely a guy that they could pick. Um, because again, like they're kind of in this interesting realm where like they're trying to contend,
uh,
obviously.
yeah,
But at the same time, right, like we know, right, in the next few years they'll probably be trending towards kind of rebuilding. Um, but for now, obviously, the goal is to contend. So, I feel like, maybe they'll go for a player, that's ready. But at the same time, right? Like, I mean, again, usually rookies don't play a whole lot for championship caliber teams.
right.
But, again, if it's a guy that's really good, that fits
He's
right in,
ready.
yeah, exactly. He could definitely be there. So, we'll kind of see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, like, because he's a combo guard that adds scoring immediately and playmaking and toughness off pretty much off rip. He's 6'4", pretty much a, like I said, combo guard. So that would be kind of interesting. I'm not sure, in terms of what the Warriors are going to do because I'm curious to see what their starting lineup is going to be coming into this season. I know they do like to play small, but is it going to be Chris Paul, Steph, and Clay, and
I'm
Dre, obviously?
It'd be the same as last year because I'm assuming Draymond comes back. So it'll
Right.
probably be Steph, Clay, Wiggins, Draymond, Looney.
So we're going
Right.
to
I
be
think
looking at Chris Paul coming off the bench. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he's gonna start for them. I'd
Right.
be
Yep.
pretty shocked if he started.
I mean, that's
Um,
technically an upgrade, I guess. You probably would prefer Chris Paul to be commanding your second unit,
yeah,
I guess around that. So,
yeah, exactly. And it's just again, I just in terms of a closing lineup, right? You got a smart lineup, but also a very small lineup, right? Because Paul's even smaller than Poole. I
right.
guess defensively, right? He's probably not going to make the same types of mistakes, but he's still a guy that's going to get targets because again, he's 6 feet tall.
Exactly.
Um, if that, right? So it's just, and we saw, again in the playoffs, we saw, what it looked like, when they went against a team like the Lakers, where even Denver was bigger than the Lakers, but the Lakers were also much bigger than Golden State. So
Right.
you know, I just yeah, but there's definitely a lot of options for them here. Um, but again, we got Podziemski,
That's what I
Podziemski.
thought. It's what
So
I was
yeah,
feeling. I just
and
felt
that
like
was
he
a
fit
guy
their
that I
culture.
definitely, and that was definitely a guy that I saw rising. I had him, um, lower,
I
right?
think we both
Obviously,
had. Did we
but
both have him in Memphis?
I think I had him at 25 or 26, so
Yeah,
definitely around
25 is
the Memphis.
Memphis. So
Yeah,
I had
so
him there as well.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, he's definitely a guy that I think has risen, and I've heard his name kind of rising. But again, it feels like he's the type of guy that Golden State would want to take. I
Right.
don't know how, like I said, I don't know how much he'll play his rookie year. But I think that's a fine pick, for Golden State.
Yeah.
Because again, like I said, probably backup guard. Um, right. So like that was kind of the expectation I had there.
Yes, I think that's a good pick. It's kind of similar to DiVincenzo a little bit, so kind of like that, a guy like that, but obviously a little bit better scoring coming out of
Yeah, because I'm
college.
assuming that he's probably gone. Because I'm assuming he'll probably get more money than what Golden State can give him.
Right.
So obviously with, uh, Podzemski, right, he can obviously, probably step in and play like a little bit. Again, don't expect him to play a ton, but again, he'll probably at least get some minutes. Because
Exactly.
again, they're going to have, some people play. Um,
Exactly.
I'm just kind of curious, again, because they have some questions with Draymond. Like I said, my expectation is that he comes back.
Me too.
Um,
He may
Obviously
even
there's
take a pay cut. Who knows?
yeah, I mean, obviously there's a world where he doesn't come back, but I feel like he's gonna come back because I just feel like again, um, like this is pretty much the best spot for him, and they can give him the most money. Because I feel like I don't think he's gonna take a pay cut. I feel like they're gonna give him, what he's looking for.
Sure.
Um, just because again, I feel like if he gets more from another team, he could probably, like he might bounce. But again,
Right.
I think this is a good pick for Golden State
Me too.
because again, you're
I
getting
think
a
this fits
guy.
their culture too.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're getting a smart guy that's able to come in and he's ready to play.
Yeah. Mm. Let's see. So now, with the Warriors off the board, it's Houston. This is a,
And so
this is
obviously
this is one to
completely different.
watch.
Yeah, exactly. So completely different position from Golden
Right.
State, right? Full on rebuild. Um, Again, you got Thompson, so I feel like here this is probably where you just probably pick like just another maybe another forward.
Could be seeing Chris
Maybe
Murray go off the board.
yeah, exactly. Maybe some 2-3, 3-4 type player, right? I don't think they're gonna pick another point guard, so that's
Mm-mm.
my guess. Probably a wing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Um, but again, like I said, Houston's in a different spot, right? Like I said, full on rebuild. A lot of young guys. So there's a lot, going on here.
Yeah.
Um, so
Sorry.
so yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. All right, here we
Okay.
go. The Houston
Cam
Rockets are
Whitmore.
starting ending Cam Whitmore slide decision looming there.
I
So
like
that's
that.
interesting.
I like that.
Yeah. And like I said, some type of wing. Again, I guess, he's a scorer, so feel like you have a decent level of scoring, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, nothing necessarily wrong with it.
You're right.
Because again, if you're Houston, right, you're rebuilding, right, and this is a guy that was projected initially to be a top 5 pick, so why not take a gamble?
Yeah.
If you're Houston,
Yeah, I think, and Whitmore does have grit, even though it seems like the reports have been showing us that he's a little bit less energetic. And they've really been saying basically lazy. I didn't want to use that word, but that's really unfortunate to hear. But nonetheless, I think, yeah, so they've selected Whitmore. So, I mean, I think this is a good pick. You want to see, the Whitmore drought end. So I think this is a good fit for him and a good fit for them as well, and hopefully, the coaching staff can get the most out of him and he can, rehab and heal correctly and show the
yeah,
league, that they pretty much messed up because I was pretty high on him. I had him going to Detroit.
Right.
over the Sword Thompson. But this
I
is a
guess
good pick. I think this is
yeah,
good.
right. I guess you could also look at it from the perspective of, when you look at teams like Golden State or Miami or the Lakers, the other possibility in terms of keeping their pick is like, we talked about with the CBA, you might have to be in a position where you might just have to, just kind of go roll with these young guys, on the
Sure.
small rookie contracts. Because, again, with Golden State, if they had kept Jordan Poole, right, a couple years from now, they'd be, way into the CBA, underworld, basically, right, where
Pretty
they're at a
much, yeah.
point where like, you lose out on picks. You can't sign certain players, you can't make certain types of trades.
Right.
Um, and again, the Lakers aren't quite there yet, but obviously once they, bring back some of their guys, right, they'll be closer to that bracket. And obviously Miami's a team with, that's got another team that has an expensive roster. So I
Right.
do kind of wonder, because again, I'm sure like, some of these fans of some of these teams are probably like, why aren't we trading the pick? Why aren't we trading the pick? And that might kind of come into the calculation. But obviously with Houston, it was reported that they were trying to trade up to that 17, 18, 19 spot, but they
Right.
didn't. So, but again, you took Cam Whitmore, so I guess that's fine, right? You took a guy that you, I guess, wanted, and you didn't have to use like 4 or 5 to take him, right? Because obviously, if he fell, that suggests people are very, very skeptical on him,
Right.
right? So again, if you're Houston, you came out with Thompson and Whitmore, and I think that's fine, right? You
That's a
got a
great
guard.
haul.
I think that's a pretty solid combination. Um, in the draft, because that's really what you're looking for, to round out that rotation, right? Because again,
Exactly.
you have Green, assuming he stays, right? You have Shengun, you got Jabari Smith. So you
Yes.
get the other wing alongside of those guys, and then a point guard, and then you're kind of rolling from that point on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because again, it's always a gamble, for the draft, anyways. But I think Houston's done a great job.
Yeah.
Um, you know, Once we do our podcast, where we're actually, kind of talking about things as they've ended, right? Definitely Houston, I think, is definitely one of those winners. For
Absolutely.
tonight, I think they made some really good picks. That they have so far. And
Next.
again, like
Yeah.
have a lot of flexibility with that cap space as well. So you combine some veterans, with those young guys. I think that's really good.
Yeah. Next up, I'm pretty curious. This is a big one. Brooklyn's got back-to-back picks.
Yeah,
And the first one is via the Suns. So this is the 21st pick. We talked about this one on the on our podcast episode or mock draft. I had Chris Murray going here and then Colby Jones going right after. I think, a good pickup would be, a two guard and then a small forward, power forward kind of guy. So
right.
that's kind of what I'm looking at because I feel like they've solidified themselves. Um, with Nick Claxton, he's definitely shown he's one of the better defensive bigs in the league. So I don't think they need to go, big man here. And Chris Murray's more of a 3-4, preferably more of a three in my opinion. So and he knockdown shooter. He's basically Keegan Murray. Um,
But yeah, well here, I had Hawkins and
okay,
Nick Smith Jr., right?
okay,
Obviously Hawkins is already off the board.
right,
So I guess, the next guys, that I have is pretty much, we got like I said, other than Nick Smith Jr., right? Najee, but like you said, they don't really need another big. So I feel like
right.
Nick Smith Jr. probably makes some sense. Or maybe, like a sort of a point guard type player,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you could use that as well, right? Considering Dinwiddie's an older guy, not old, right? But you know what I mean? Like he's probably not a guy you will have long term.
Right.
Um, so I'm feeling with Brooklyn, they'll probably take, like a guard.
Sure.
Maybe like, sort of like you said, maybe like somebody that's more of a four.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I said, maybe Nick Smith, maybe Clowney, maybe Sensabaugh, right? But
True.
obviously, like, um, definitely some stuff has changed, but like I said, I feel like they're gonna pick a guard with this pick. I think it makes too much sense because again,
Right.
you're already set, with Bridges, and Claxton, right? Those are guys that you're probably gonna keep long term. Um, right? Cam Johnson, I'm assuming they're bringing back, so I feel like probably like a guard, either small or bigger guard. I'm not sure, right? But I
Yeah.
feel like that's probably where we're headed here. So I could see like a Nick Smith or like you mentioned, Murray being taken as well.
Yeah. But man, what a great night for Houston. I mean,
Yeah.
wow. I mean, because if Cam comes back and stays healthy, I think they pretty much won this draft because, they basically got two lottery
Outside of the
guys.
Spurs, I guess.
Yeah, true. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, the Spurs are the true winners, but in terms of, the talent haul, I think, you can't really be mad at, you know, getting one of the Thompson twins, arguably one of the better ones, with potential wise. and then also obviously Cam Whitmore if he comes back and stays healthy. I think that's a huge deal because they got Whitmore basically on they got him at a steal, I guess you could say, regardless of the reports. I mean, I feel like, getting Whitmore at 20 is a pretty big deal because this is a former top five projected guy. So,
Exactly. So, I mean, so I guess, it'll be interesting, like I said, to see who Brooklyn picks because
yeah,
they're in a weird spot, right? Where they're in that middle tier of the NBA where, they're not a great team, but they're also not a terrible team. But they're also a team that doesn't have an incentive to be bad because, they don't have a number of their, picks at this point because of the
right.
Harden trade. Um, so they were a team like it that I was thinking maybe might like look to trade these picks, but again, it doesn't seem like these teams right now, have been able to move these picks. So like we said before, like Brooklyn, assuming they take these picks, like I said, I feel like they're going to take the guys that we mentioned. But yeah, like you said with Houston, definitely a great night for them. If Cam Whitmore, can be the guy that people think that he was going to be, before tonight's draft, right? Because
Right.
he was ranked very high. And again, it's unfortunate for him that he was able to, that he fell. But he did fall to Houston. Um, and in fairness to them, right, they also got Thompson. So, like I said, I think that's a nasty combination in a good way.
Yeah.
Um, to continue to rebuild. So,
yeah.
I don't think I think that's about as good as you could ask for if you're Houston, right? Because
Yeah.
again, like I said, their targets needed to be guard and a wing, and they got both. I
So
think.
let's see. Looking at the first rounders projected, obviously we've got Chris Murray still, Colby Jones, Bryce Sensabaugh, um, Oliver, Maxence Prosper, Nick Smith Jr., Ryan Rupert, Trace Jackson Davis, and Gregory Jackson. So those are kind of like the projected first rounders that are still on the board. Who knows? There may be some guys who are projected in the second round that go in the first round, but I doubt it. So, I'm curious to see where these guys land. And I feel like Brooklyn kind of holds the cards on this. I feel like Brooklyn's next two picks are going to kind of dictate the order of where everybody else goes. But they do have some great options like Sensabaugh for sure, Nick Smith Jr., Ryan Rupert, um, guys like that. I feel like that there's potential for this. So I'm curious.
I agree. Because again, right now, we're just kind of waiting around, right? I think,
Yeah,
Brooklyn
we're in
still has
limbo.
about 3 minutes or so
Hmm.
um on the clock. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely been, a crazy draft so far. Obviously not quite as many trades as I think we were expecting.
Hmm.
But in fairness, we also had the two huge trades, before the draft. So I guess it kind of evens out there. But it is kind of interesting because I kind of expected that there were going to be more trades, with these guys moving around. But again, at the same time, like I said with the CBA, this may just be, what's going to happen from here on out. But obviously, again, you don't have to trade the picks tonight. But regardless, in terms of the actual players, right? Because that's the main thing that this is about, for sure. Um, again, I think the Magic, did really good with Black, but obviously, not quite the same with Howard.
Right.
Um, and then Houston obviously did great. But I think by and large, so far, it's been pretty good for most of these teams, right? Like there haven't been really picks where I'm like, this is awful. Um,
Exactly.
like even the Orlando one, like you said, it's not great, but it's not like one where I'm like, this
It's not a
is,
stinker.
this is a guaranteed, like disaster. You know
It's
what I
not a
mean?
stinker at all.
And again, I feel like with Orlando, because they didn't trade the pick, it just feels like, they were just like, one of these we're gonna take a guy for sure, then the other one will just take a swing.
Yeah.
You know?
And
Like
that
I guess
that's the kind of process that you kind of have to run with because I feel like Howard's potential is there. I think he has the potential to be one of the better players in this draft, but he's similar to Koulibaly where it's like it's a project. It's really rough and raw around the edges, but you can't really be mad at any of these picks. I think these are all very solid picks. Let me see here.
so. We got about a minute, and a minute and a half, a little bit less than that before Brooklyn has to go. So they're pretty much taking their time with this pick, and nothing's still been put out yet.
Right.
About who they're gonna pick. But it'll probably come out relatively soon. Um, so I mean, right now, again, as we get closer to the bottom part of the draft, right, or at least of the first round,
Right.
this is where it gets kind of interesting because again, like, which is, weird is that, some of these teams, have picks at the end, like say Portland, right? They have the 23rd pick. Um, I believe Charlotte has a pick, towards the back part of the first round. We saw a couple of trades, right? I think Denver now is traded up, right? So they were able to get, a pick right towards the end of the first round.
Hmm.
Uh, but obviously, we're gonna kind of stick with Brooklyn here because the pick's gonna come out like probably within the next, 10,
Wait,
20 seconds.
Denver
Looks
has a
like no,
pick. Denver has a pick in the first round.
think so. It's either early second or late first, but it looks like Brooklyn's taking Noah Clowney.
Ooh,
That was
that's a
another name.
okay. That's a guy that was projected second round.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. That's a name that I had like late first. I
Hmm.
think I had him at 24.
Okay,
So this
I had
isn't
him in
too
the
far
second.
from where I had him. Kind of a big forward. I guess 6'10", relatively thin,
Yeah.
long arms, but again, probably like kind of like a project guy,
Yes.
because yeah, exactly. Because I feel like, some of these guys here, that's kind of what you're gonna see. Um, but again, like I feel like that's probably what Brooklyn is probably needs. Because again,
Right.
like they were really small in the playoffs, right? Outside of Claxton, right? He was like basically their only real center,
Right.
right? So you saw lineups where they have like Royce O'Neal at center, or like Dorian Finney-Smith, and like
Sure.
again those guys are fine. They're just not centers.
Right.
Um, so having a little bit more size and rebounding, you know, and interior presence, I feel like that will probably help them. So I like that pick.
Yeah.
Um,
He's probably around like what, the sixth best center or power forward in this class, and he's I feel like this is
right.
more of a class that was kind of short, particularly in bigs,
Yeah. More
So
so like
this is the
forwards
right
and
pick.
guards.
I think this is
Yeah,
the
but
right pick. I had him more in the second round, but that's
right.
for, like you said, he's more of a project kind of guy. But I believe in it.